Welcome to Bald Voldemort. Today's adventure. What if Harry's creature inheritance at age 11 half-phoenix and Voldemort's Horcrux burned out? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1, Ash and Inheritance. The hour before Harry Potter's 11th birthday arrived without warning at number 4, Privet Drive, which was strange because the house had received a great deal of warning in the previous several days. Envelopes had appeared from beneath the floorboards. Envelopes had spun in through the chimney while Vernon Dursley was lighting his pipe. Envelopes had been nailed by some unseen hand to the underside of the dining table. On one occasion, an envelope had been folded by no fingers anyone could see into a paper crane, and it had taken one slow lap of the living room before it settled, polite as a visiting cat, on the rim of Petunia Dursley's teacup. Vernon had burned all of them. Petunia had watched him burn them with the expression of a woman who knew, in some half-buried, unforgiven part of herself, that you could not burn a thing of this kind. You could only delay it. By the time the kitchen clock crawled to within 13 minutes of midnight, Vernon Dursley had locked every door on the ground floor, drawn every curtain, and gone to bed with the calm conviction of a man who has finally won an argument with weather. Petunia had not gone to bed. She had taken her tea into the sitting room, and she had sat in the armchair facing the door, and she had not put her tea down. She did not turn the lamp on. The light from the kitchen reached her through the doorway in a thin, yellow tongue, and that was all the light she allowed herself. In the cupboard under the stairs, Harry Potter, who was as small as a boy of nearly 11 could be and still be called nearly 11, was lying on his back staring at the underside of the staircase. The wood there had a knot in it that he had been looking at since he was 4. He had decided, around the age of 6, that the knot was a sailing ship. He had decided, around the age of 8, that the knot was probably only a knot. He had recently begun to wonder whether the two opinions were, in fact, contradictory. He was warm. This was the first thing he noticed, and the strangest, because the cupboard was never warm. The cupboard was cold in winter and tepid in summer, and the wool blanket Petunia had once left him by accident 3 years ago had been removed the moment she remembered. He owned no warm things. He had never been warm in this room. He was warm now. It was not the warmth of the air. The air, he knew with the precision of long acquaintance, was the same air, dust, an old shoe, and the faint vinegar of polish it had been an hour ago. The warmth was inside him. It moved with the slowness of a tide rising on a coast where no tide had been before, beginning behind his ribs and reaching outward by degrees, into his shoulders, into the angles of his hands, into the small bones at his ankles. There was no pain. He noticed that very carefully. There was no pain. He turned his head on the thin pillow. The spiders were leaving. He had not known before tonight that there were so many spiders in the cupboard with him. They emerged from the gaps in the wainscot and the seams at the corners of the boards, and they went, in single file and in column of 3, down the slope of the floor and under the door and away into the hall. There was no panic in their motion. They walked like a household evacuating in the orderly small hours, taking only the essentials. He watched the last of them go. The door breathed back closed behind their tail. He sat up. He should have hit his head. He had hit his head on the staircase ceiling 1,000 times in his life. He did not hit his head. He raised his hand and felt the air an inch above him, still there. He raised his hand higher. The wood was where it had always been. He had simply not hit it. In the sitting room beyond the door, Aunt Petunia made a small, contained sound that was not quite a word. He recognized it as the noise she made when she had cut her thumb chopping celery, the year she had been pregnant with Dudley, before she had learned not to make noises like that in his hearing. "Aunt Petunia," he said. She did not answer. He looked down at his hands. His hands were not glowing. He inspected this fact carefully. He turned them in the dim and ascertained their non-glowing status from several angles, the way one might run a hand around the inside of a borrowed coat. They were warm. They were the warm of fresh bread, of an animal asleep in the sun. They were not the warm of anything he had been told human hands could be. Then his hair began to lift. It did this without breeze, in a slow, unaccountable manner, lock by lock, as though the air around his head had been replaced with something gentler than air. He reached up. The strands moved against his palm and did not lie down. He pulled a single strand toward his eye to look at it. In the cupboard's thin striated dark, it was, for an instant, an ordinary black. Then it was not. A vein of color ran down its length, copper, then deeper, than the orange of a coal that has been kept alive under ash. He pulled gently at the strand, and the color slid along it like a bead on a wire. "All right," he said, quite politely to no one. He had been raised in a house where being too startled at the wrong things was a punishable offense, and the habit had outlived its enforcement. "All right." The clock in the kitchen began to strike midnight. The first stroke was loud, in the way of a house where everyone is pretending to be asleep. The second stroke was louder. By the third, he was aware that the chime was not coming from the clock alone, but from inside the cupboard with him, in a place behind his sternum where his heart did not live and had never bothered him before. Each stroke landed once in the kitchen and once inside him. 12 and 12. On the seventh stroke, his scar opened. He did not scream. He did not have time to scream. The split was clean and small, and he felt it as one might feel a thread being drawn out of a seam. There was, finally, a little pain, a sharp, impatient kind, the way the tip of a needle is sharp, and then there was a smell, which was the smell of something burning that had no business in a human body, a smell of old leather and old ink and a faintly green rot. A wisp of black drifted up out of his forehead and hung an inch above his skin. It had the shape of a small, drowsy moth. The moth tried to settle back. The skin under it cooked it. It made a tiny, soft sound, a sound between a sigh and a hiss, and then there was nothing in the air above the scar but the smell, and then there was not even the smell. In a glass-fronted cabinet in the library of Malfoy Manor, 4 counties and 1 universe away, a small black diary on the third shelf began to smoke at the edges. It did not catch fire. It cooked itself. Lucius Malfoy was at that moment 3 rooms distant and asleep, and so the cabinet glass blackened gently from inside, and the leather contracted with the slowness of a small animal dying in winter. By morning, when Narcissa would open the cabinet to fetch a different book, the diary would be a brick of gray-white ash, and the ash would crumble at her touch as if it had been waiting only for the courtesy of a witness. Harry Potter, in the cupboard, raised his hand to his forehead. The scar was closed. It was closed in a way it had never been closed before, flat, without the puckered ridge of long-healed tissue, only a thin, pale silver line, the kind of scar you have to be told about to find. He moved his fingertips over it. He could not feel the line at all, only the smoothness of his own skin. It was peculiar in the way of waking up in a bed you have been in for 10 years and finding it has acquired 1 extra pillow overnight. A small change so quietly accomplished that it seemed to predate the noticing. The warmth in his chest had become a fire in his chest. It was not destructive. He understood that, although he could not have explained how he understood it, the way you understand that a bath is warm and not hot, that the kettle is whistling and not screaming, that an animal in your lap is asleep and not dead. The fire was contained. It was contained by being him. Its boundary was the boundary of his skin, and his skin was holding, and his skin was not going to break, because the fire belonged inside it. He stood up. The cupboard door, which had a small latch on the outside that Vernon habitually slid closed, opened for him before he touched it. It opened slowly, out of politeness, he felt, rather than violence. The latch unbolted itself with the quiet click of a butler stepping aside. He stepped into the hall. Petunia was on her feet in the sitting room. He could see her by the kitchen's thin yellow light. She had not put down her teacup. Her knuckles were white around its handle. She was looking at him from across the room with an expression he had never seen on her face, and only after he had looked at her for a long moment did he understand it. She was looking at him without resentment. Whatever had replaced the resentment was not affection. It was the still, attentive face of someone watching a fire which has, for the moment, decided not to spread to the curtains. "Lily," she said. It was not addressed to him. "Aunt Petunia," he said. "Lily," she said again. "Lily, you said it would not." He did not say anything. He had nothing to say to that. She brought the teacup very carefully to her mouth and drank from it. Her hand did not shake. She lowered the cup. She looked at him over the rim. "Stand still," she said. He stood still. She crossed the room toward him. The carpet under her slippers made the small sound it always made. She stopped 2 paces from him. She did not touch him. She put her face nearer his face than she had in many years, and she looked at him in a clinical, exhausted way, the way she might have inspected a smear on a wall to see whether it would come off. He saw then that her eyes were full of tears, and that this fact was an inconvenience to her and not a feeling. She was not crying because she was sad. She was crying because the eyes do that sometimes without permission. "Your eyes," she said. "What about them?" "Lily's color. Lily's color." Your eyes were Lily's color. She paused. "They are not Lily's color now." He did not know what color his eyes were. He had never owned a mirror. "What color are they?" he said. She made a tiny gesture with the hand that did not hold the teacup, the gesture of a woman about to describe something that was not in her vocabulary. She gave up and gave him the gesture instead. "There is a fire in them," she said. "There is a fire under the green. It is, they are still green, they are still her green, there is a fire under it." "All right," he said. "It is not all right," she said. "It is not all right at all. She told me she had put it away. She told me she had drawn it out of you so that you would be safe. She told me you would be ordinary." Her voice had gone very quiet. The quiet of it was not kindness. It was the quiet of a woman who had been keeping her voice down for so many years that she could not, even now, find the louder register. "She told me. Lily told me." "Aunt Petunia," he said, "I don't know what's happening." She looked at him. There was a long pause, during which the kitchen clock, having finished striking midnight, ticked 4 times. Then her face composed itself by a visible effort into its usual shape. "Go back to the cupboard," she said. Go back to the cupboard, Harry. Wait until morning. In the morning there will be people for this. There are always people for this." She closed her eyes. She opened them. Lily said there would be people. He went back to the cupboard. He did not sleep, exactly. He lay on the cot with his eyes closed and listened to the fire in his chest do whatever it was doing, and after a while he understood that what it was doing was waiting. The fire was finishing something. He had the distinct sense, the way you have the sense of a kettle approaching its boil, that one process had ended and another had not yet started, and that the gap between them was him. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he became aware that he could hear, very faintly, the sound of a bird singing. It was not a bird from outside. It was a bird from somewhere he had not learned to name yet. It was a single line of music, perhaps 4 notes, descending and then rising. It was the gentlest thing he had ever heard. He listened to it the way one listens at the edge of sleep, without trying to hold onto the meaning of it, and after a few minutes the line of music settled inside him in the place where the fire was, and the fire quieted, and he slept. He woke to a sound he had heard once before in his life. The year he was 7, when a man on a motorbike had crashed in the cul-de-sac, and the constable had been very loud about it. It was the sound of someone knocking on the front door who had never knocked on a door of this size before and was therefore knocking it harder than the door deserved. There were 3 knocks, then there was a pause, then there were 5 more. "Vernon," came Aunt Petunia's voice from above. "Vernon, you must come down. Vernon." The stairs above Harry's cupboard groaned under what could only be described as a procession. "It's the middle of the night, Petunia. It is 5:30 in the morning, Vernon." Same thing. "There is a man at the door. Tell him to go away." "Vernon." The procession reached the bottom of the stairs. Vernon Dursley, in his striped dressing gown, went past the cupboard with the heavy commitment of a man who has decided his last best chance is to be terrifying. He yanked the door open. The man at the door took up the door frame. He was, and Harry, listening from the cupboard, understood this only by reconstruction afterward, taller than the door, by some margin, and so wide that he had had to come up the path sideways. He was wearing a coat that appeared to have many smaller animals living in it. He had a beard that suggested he had been raised in a country where the beard was an architectural feature. "Mr. and Mrs. Dursley," he said, in a voice that he was clearly trying to bring down to a respectable volume, "good morning. My name is Rubeus Hagrid. I'm keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. I've come for Harry." Vernon did not speak. He could not, Harry thought, find the sentence he wanted. There were too many of them. "Move aside, please," Hagrid said in the same trying not to be loud voice. Vernon moved aside. It was not surrender exactly. It was an experiment. It was the experiment of a man who had decided that the easiest way to make a problem stop existing was to let it walk all the way into his house and turn out to be ordinary after all. Hagrid did not turn out to be ordinary. Hagrid bent, with great care, the way a man might bend to enter a tent he was concerned for, and came through the doorway, and then stood up again in the hall, where the ceiling abruptly became a problem. He looked around the hall in the manner of someone who has been told by responsible adults to be polite and is doing his best. "Where's Harry, then?" he said. Petunia, on the stairs, lifted one hand and pointed. She did not point at the cupboard. She pointed at the cupboard door. Hagrid looked at the cupboard. He looked at the cupboard for several seconds. His face did several things in succession, none of which Harry could see, but which Harry could read perfectly well from the way the breath went out of the man on the other side of the door. "He sleeps in there?" Petunia did not answer. "He sleeps in there, ma'am. He has a bedroom upstairs," Vernon said too quickly. "He had, Dudley needed there were. Get him out of there," Hagrid said in a small voice. Harry was already on his feet. He did not wait for the latch to be drawn back. The latch, again, drew itself back. The cupboard door swung politely open. Harry stepped out into the hall and looked up. The man's eyes did a thing, Harry thought afterward, that he had not expected from such a large face. They softened. There was no other word for it. They had been hard with the particular hardness of someone who has just discovered, in another adult's house, a thing he does not approve of, and they softened, and they kept softening until they were the eyes Harry had hoped. All his life, an adult would once look at him with. "Hello, Harry," Hagrid said. Harry tried to say hello. He found that his throat was full of a thing he could not name. He nodded, instead. Hagrid sank to one knee in the hall, which made him approximately the height he might have been at 5'8", and looked at Harry from there. "Well," he said. "Well now, look at you, Lily's eyes." Petunia made the small sound on the stairs again. "You don't know yet, do you?" Hagrid said. "You don't know what you are." "I don't know what I am," Harry said. "I'm going to tell you," Hagrid said. "But first I'm going to take you somewhere that isn't this house. Anywhere. Anywhere that isn't this house. You can choose anywhere you like." "Out," Harry said. "Out it is," said Hagrid. Vernon recovered the use of his voice. "Now see here." "No," said Hagrid pleasantly. Vernon saw there. Outside on the lawn, the sky was the gentle dilute blue of a summer morning still deciding whether to become a day. There was no motorbike. There was instead an umbrella which Hagrid had set down by the front step and which he now picked up. He glanced at Harry. He glanced at the umbrella. He glanced back at Harry. "You hungry?" he said. "Yes," Harry said, which surprised him. He had not been hungry in years. "London, then," said Hagrid. "There's a place. Come along. Up." He held out one enormous hand. Harry put his hand inside it. Hagrid's hand closed gently around his. They walked down the path together. At the gate, Harry stopped and turned and looked back at the house. Petunia was at the door. She was not crying any longer. She lifted one hand, just to her shoulder, in a gesture too small for waving. He raised one hand back. It was warm. When the leaky cauldron came, it came around a corner that did not exist a moment earlier. A smear of dark wood between a bookshop and a record shop on a London street he had not seen before. Tom the landlord looked up from behind the bar and saw Hagrid, and his face did the polite warming a publican's face does on receiving an expected stranger. Then he looked down, about 6 feet down, at Harry, and his polite warming became something which Harry was going to have to learn the shape of in the coming weeks. A startled, hushed recognition, the kind a man might show in the act of catching sight of a king while changing his own socks. "Mr. Hagrid," said Tom. "And this would be," said Hagrid. "Bacon, please, Tom, 2 plates, tea, and a quieter table if you've got one." "All the tables are quieter," said Tom faintly. He led them, with a great deal of dignity, to the second of the tables under the leaded window at the back. 2 old wizards at the bar turned to look. One of them dropped his pipe. Tom said, "Pardon me," and walked over to the corner of the room and stood there for a moment as though he had errands he had forgotten to do. He came back and brought tea. Harry ate. He was, to his quiet astonishment, hungry in a way he had not been hungry before, the way an engine is hungry the morning of a long journey. He ate the bacon and a plate of eggs after the bacon, and a piece of toast with butter and another piece of toast with butter and a third piece of toast, on which Hagrid put a small sticky brick of treacle from a pot. Harry ate the treacle. He ate it neatly. He cleaned his plate. He was warm. "How do you feel?" said Hagrid. "Warm," said Harry. "Aye," said Hagrid. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Your scar, may I look?" Harry tipped his fringe up. Hagrid leaned closer. He had a small, surprisingly nimble pair of half-moon glasses which he had produced from somewhere and which he set on his enormous nose with great care. He looked at Harry's forehead for a long time. "There's no scar," he said. "There isn't?" "Wait," Hagrid leaned closer. "There's a bit, a very thin bit, you can hardly see it. It's all silver." That's not the scar I was told about. That isn't." He sat back. He took the glasses off. He put them away in his coat. He looked at Harry for a long moment. "Harry," he said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you to tell me the truth. Last night, just before midnight, did anything happen?" "Yes," said Harry. "What?" "My hair lifted up," said Harry. "The spiders left. The cupboard door opened. I was warm. My scar opened up and something came out of it, and then it closed up again, and now my hair is a different color." Hagrid stared at him. "Right," he said. He took a sip of tea. He put the tea down. He raised it again and took another sip. He put it down again. Right. Well, that's Harry. You and I are going to have to go and talk to someone." "Who?" said Harry. "Professor Dumbledore. He's the headmaster of the school you're going to, the school you've been getting letters about. You did get the letters, didn't you?" "My uncle burned them." "Course he did." Hagrid drained the tea. "Right. Plan. We're going to go down Diagon Alley first because that part is on the list, and then we'll see about the rest of it. Some things are best done in order, especially these things. Especially with a boy who, Harry, listen, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not sure I know what's happened to you. Not the whole of it, I have an idea about a bit of it, but I want a man wiser than me to look at you. All right?" "All right," said Harry. "Good lad," Hagrid said. He folded his napkin. "Diagon Alley. Now then, brick wall out back, tap and turn." He glanced at Harry's amber-streaked hair and his quiet, attentive face and his warmth, and a small thing happened behind his eyes that Harry did not have a name for. "Stick close," he said. "There'll be people." There were people. Diagon Alley, on the last morning of July, was the kind of crowd that has not yet decided to be a crowd. It was still 100 individuals at the same time who were each pretending to ignore one another. They did not ignore Harry. They tried. They turned their heads with great purpose toward shop windows and away from him and then back again. The way men in a railway carriage will all decide together not to look at the woman who has come in carrying a baby and a sword. He felt the looks the way you feel light through your eyelids. "Don't mind 'em," murmured Hagrid. "They'll get used to you, or they won't. Either way." He set a hand the size of a small spade lightly on Harry's shoulder. "Gringotts first. Money, then everywhere else." Gringotts smelled of polished stone and old paper. The goblins behind the counters did not look up from their work as Hagrid and Harry came in. One of them looked up. Then a second one looked up. Then the first goblin's quill stopped moving and went down on the counter with a small click, and the goblin tilted its head, just slightly, in the precise manner of a thing assessing a thing. "Mr. Hagrid," said the goblin at the desk Hagrid approached. "Mr. Potter." "Mornin', Griffook," said Hagrid. "We've come for Vault 687, and I've got a letter and all." He patted his pockets, came up with a small, grimy envelope, and slid it across the counter. The seal on the envelope was an elaborate H crossed with a phoenix. The goblin took the envelope. The goblin slit it neatly with a fingernail. The goblin read it, eyes moving in narrow horizontal sweeps. The goblin looked up. He looked at Harry. He looked at Harry's hair. He looked at Harry's eyes. He set the letter down very gently on the counter. He folded his hands. "Mr. Potter," he said, "we would also like to speak with you. At another time, not today, I will send word. There is a matter which has been waiting for you." He paused. He selected his next words with the particularity of someone climbing along a wall by handholds. "It has been waiting a long time." "All right," said Harry. The goblin inclined his head, a small motion, and rang a small bell. A cart took them down. Hagrid clutched the rail with the desperate concentration of a man whose body was clearly not built for this sort of thing. Harry watched the green-lit stone fly past and felt the rush of the dark on his face, and the warmth in his chest did not abate and did not flicker and was perfectly content. They stopped. The vault opened. There was a great deal of gold in it, more gold than Harry had ever thought of as belonging to anyone in particular, certainly not to him. Hagrid filled a small bag in a businesslike way. He filled another. He weighed both bags in his hands and concluded that they were enough. "That's enough for school," he said, "and a bit over besides. Your parents left you well, Harry. They knew what they were doing. They knew you'd be needing it." He paused. "All right, up we go." Back in the sun outside, Diagon Alley had finished waking. The shop signs swung. The cauldrons in the cauldron shop clanged gently against each other in the breeze. Hagrid worked through the school list with the cheerful competence of a man who had done this many times. "Robes," said Hagrid, consulting the list. "Madam Malkin's. We'll do robes first because robes are easy. Then books. Then a cauldron, then potions, ingredients. Then we'll have to do the wand. We'll save the wand for last." "Why?" said Harry. "Because," Hagrid said, "the wand is Mr. Ollivander is. Mr. Ollivander is the kind of man who, if he sees you first thing in the morning, he won't be useful for anything else all day." Madam Malkin's was small and bright and full of the strong, clean smell of new wool. Madam Malkin herself, a short witch in mauve, smiled professionally at Hagrid, and then her smile reached Harry and went still. She did not say anything about it. She measured him on a little wooden stool while a tape ran around him on its own, recording itself with a small pencil. Another boy was being measured beside him, a pale boy a head taller, with a thin, pointed face and white blonde hair and very good shoes. "Hullo," said the pale boy. "Hogwarts too?" "Yes," said Harry. "My father's next door buying my books," said the pale boy. "And then I'm going to drag him to look at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully father into getting me one and smuggle it in somehow." He paused. "Have you got your own broom?" "No," said Harry. "Play Quidditch at all?" The pale boy looked at him properly for the first time. He looked at Harry's hair. He looked at Harry's eyes. He looked at Harry's smooth, scarless forehead. His face went through a small reorganization, the way a chess player's face goes through one small reorganization when his opponent makes a move he has not seen before. "What's your name?" he said. "Harry." "Harry what?" "Harry Potter." The boy on the stool beside him did a remarkable thing. He did not say anything. Whatever sharp, well-rehearsed sentence he had been ready to deliver next was put away politely, and another, quieter sentence was tried out in the back of his mouth, and rejected, and a third one was located. "I'm Draco Malfoy," he said after the small, organized pause. "I'll see you at school." "All right," said Harry. You don't look like." The boy stopped. He shook his head, a small, unwilling motion. "I'll see you at school," he said again. Madam Malkin pinned Harry's hem. Madam Malkin's pin did not draw blood. Harry felt the small, cool kiss of the steel and felt the warmth inside him part politely around it and close behind. He was beginning, he found, to enjoy himself. Books were heavy. The cauldron was tin. Potions' ingredients were strange. Hagrid bought Harry, on the way past a shop window full of small, noisy lives, an ice cream that was both chocolate and raspberry, and which Harry ate slowly the way a man might eat a thing he had been told about in stories. The afternoon thinned. The crowd thinned. The shadows in the alley lengthened toward purple. Hagrid stopped in front of a narrow shop with a peeling sign that read, in lettering older than anything else in the alley, OLLIVANDRS, "Makers of fine wands since 382 BC, last stop," said Hagrid. "After this, dinner." The bell over the door tinkled in a thin, querulous way. Inside, the shop was a single long room of shelves piled to the ceiling with narrow boxes, and in the middle of the room, an old man with white hair and eyes like clean moonstones stood as though he had been standing in that exact spot waiting since the previous Tuesday. "Ah," said Mr. Ollivander, in a voice that was both quiet and reaching. "Yes," he looked at Harry. His face did something unpracticed. It was not surprise. It was the recognition of an old man for an old thing seen again after a long absence. "Mr. Potter," he said, "how did you—" "I have been expecting you," said Ollivander, "since the day before yesterday. I felt the moment. I was at supper. I put down my fork." He stepped closer. He did not look at Harry the way the others had. He looked at Harry the way a watchmaker looks at a watch he has been asked to repair, which is to say without sentiment and with affection. "Hold out your wand arm, Mr. Potter. My, which? You favor your right hand. Hold it out." Ollivander produced a measuring tape that began at once to measure Harry on its own, around his wrist, his elbow, the inside of his shoulder, his neck. "While the tape works, we will talk." He stepped to the shelves. "A wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. You have heard this. It is true. The wand finds what is in the wizard and finishes the sentence. With most wizards I match by ear. I listen for what will speak best. With you I am not matching by ear. With you I am consulting a register." He pulled down a box. He opened it. He held the wand out. Harry took it. He did not need to be told to wave it. The wand twitched in his fingers, and Ollivander said, very quickly, "No, give it back, no, that one was a guess." Another wand. Another. The pile on the counter grew. Harry was beginning to enjoy himself in a different way now, the deep, amused enjoyment of a child watching an adult fail at the same game 40 times in a row. Ollivander did not look discouraged. Ollivander looked, in fact, increasingly content in the way of a man closing in on a hypothesis. "Tricky customer," he said, as he came down the ladder again. Tricky, but not in the usual way, in a different way. I think I know where we are going." He paused at the back of the shop. "There are," he said, "2 wands in this shop with a phoenix feather core. 2 only. One I sold this afternoon. It went to a boy your age, a boy with a face that has done unpleasant things in another life. The other I have not sold." He pulled down a long, thin box. He came back. He set it on the counter. 11.5 inches, holly, phoenix feather, nice and supple. Harry took the wand out of the box. The shop went still. The fire in his chest, which had been quiet all day in the way a sleeping dog is quiet, lifted its head. It opened one eye. It saw the small splinter of phoenix in the wood between his fingers, and it knew it, the way a cat knows another cat across a street. The wand caught fire. It did not burn. It glowed. It threw out a long, thin envelope of warm red-gold light along the entire length of itself, and the light went up his arm, and the light reached his shoulder, and the light reached the place behind his ribs where the fire had been waiting, and the fire said something to the light, and the light said something back, and the conversation was a single low sustained note like the lowest string of a cello. Ollivander, who had once made this very wand 60 years ago, and remembered the particular kind of attention with which the bird had given him the feather, took a step backward. Harry lowered the wand. "Yes," said Ollivander in a voice that had become very quiet. He looked at Harry. He looked at the wand. He looked back at Harry. "Yes." He paused. "Mr. Potter," he said, "the other phoenix feather wand I sold today was the brother of that wand. They came from the same bird. They were given me on the same day. 60 years ago, 3 feathers. I have always wondered what would become of the third." He smiled in a small, dry way, almost to himself. "I think I see now what becomes of the third." "What does that mean?" said Harry. "That," said Ollivander, "is a question for a man wiser than me." He paused. "May I, Mr. Potter?" "May you what?" Ollivander, in his peeling shop, in his ancient coat, bowed. It was not a deep bow. It was the precise, dry bow of a craftsman to a customer who has turned out to be something other than a customer. Harry, who had no idea what to do with a bow, did the only thing he could think of, which was to bow back. Ollivander, straightening, looked at the boy with the amber-streaked hair and the fire-touched green eyes, and shook his head once, almost to himself, and said, in a tone Harry would later think about often, "It is going to be an interesting year, I believe." It was twilight when they came back to the leaky cauldron. Tom had reserved a small room upstairs. Hagrid was tired in the way a man is tired who has spent a day in the company of a thing he is still working out how to think about. He sat in the only chair, which was barely big enough for him, and watched Harry unpack a few items onto the desk. The wand in its box, 3 new books, a pewter cauldron, a small bag of gold. "You'll do," said Hagrid. "You'll do." "Hagrid," said Harry, "what's a phoenix?" Hagrid looked at him for a long moment. "It's a bird," he said. It's a particular sort of bird. Lives a long time, burns up and comes back. Sings songs that mend cracks in a man. Sits with sick people. Carries dying ones home." He paused. "The headmaster has one. You'll meet it when we go up to school. I'll tell you more on the way up if you like. Sleep now." "All right," said Harry. Hagrid stood. He filled the doorway. He hesitated at the door. He turned back. "Harry," he said. "Yes. Lock your door, would you?" "All right." Hagrid closed the door behind him. Harry locked it by the simple expedient of turning the brass key. He went to the bed. He sat down on it. He looked at the window. The window was open. He had not opened it. The curtains stirred, very slightly, in a wind that had nothing to do with the city. A red bird sat on the sill. He had never seen one. He knew, without being told, what it was, the same way a person knows in a dream the names of strangers. It was the size of a large gull. Its feathers were the color of coals kept alive under ash, and at the tips of its wings the color was the color of a candle just before the wick blooms. Its eyes were small and dark and intelligent. It looked at him with the polite attention of a creature paying a visit. It tilted its head. It hopped on the sill, 1 hop, 2, 3, until it was at the inner edge. It looked at him a second longer. Then it lifted itself and crossed the room, on the slowest beat of wings he had ever seen, and settled on the back of the chair Hagrid had vacated and folded itself and bowed. The bow was small and precise, the kind of small and precise a bird is capable of. It was not a bow he could mistake for anything else. It bent its head until the long red feather at the back of its neck touched the wood and held there for the length of one breath and lifted its head and looked at him again. Harry stood up. He crossed to the chair. He did not put out a hand. The bird did not move. He sat down on the floor in front of the chair, because the floor was where he could be eye to eye, and he said, after a long moment, the only thing he could think of to say. "Hello," he said. The bird, very softly, sang 4 notes, descending and rising, and he recognized them. They were the 4 notes he had heard the night before at 3 o'clock in the morning, when he had been alone in the cupboard and had not been alone at all. "Oh," he said. The bird hopped down from the chair onto the floor in front of him, looked at him a long, long moment, and then walked in a businesslike way up his leg and onto his knee, and from his knee onto his shoulder. It folded itself there. It tucked its head against the side of his neck. It went still. The fire in Harry's chest, which had been quiet all day, gentled and softened, and warmed his blood at exactly the temperature it had been warming his blood since midnight, and he felt, for the first occasion in his memory of his own life, that he was at the correct temperature. He was the temperature he had been meant to be. He was the temperature of a creature awake in a body that had finally caught up to it. He lifted his hand, slowly, and laid 2 fingers against the bird's breast. He could feel a heartbeat there. It was slow and steady and old and unworried, and it was very nearly the same heartbeat as his. He sat on the floor of the small room above the leaky cauldron with a phoenix on his shoulder, and the fire in his chest, and the silver line on his forehead where there had once been a black moth, and he understood that he was not going to be sleeping alone again for a long time, and that this would suit him. Outside, in a country house in another county, Lucius Malfoy's diary cooled in its cabinet at last, having finished its small, reluctant business of dying. Outside, in a tower at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore lifted his head from a letter he had been writing and looked out at the night, and felt something that he had felt twice in his life before. It was not, this time, what he had felt the night the Potters had been killed. It was not, this time, what he had felt the morning Tom Riddle had walked into his office, age 11, with his hands behind his back. It was something new. He set the quill down. He waited. The night did not give him any more information. He picked the quill back up. He continued the letter. Chapter 2, The Train, the Hat. The Hall the Bird did not have a name yet, in Harry's head, although Harry suspected it had a name in someone else's. It had stayed on his shoulder all night in a way that was not bird-like. It had not preened. It had not shifted its weight. It had not pecked. It had simply sat there as a small, warm second presence and slept the slow phoenix sleep. The kind of sleep that runs on a longer clock than humans do. When Harry had woken at 5 in the morning, in the strange bed in the strange room, the first thing he had registered was the small, warm weight against his neck. The second thing he had registered was that he was not, this morning, afraid. This was new. He had not understood until then the degree to which fear had been part of him in the way breathing was part of him, a quiet running thing he did not think about. He had thought of it as the room he lived in. He had thought of it as the floor. Now he stood, slowly, careful not to dislodge the sleeping bird, and dressed himself in his new clothes, and looked at himself in the small mirror over the basin. The boy in the mirror was not the boy he had owned for 10 years. He looked at his hair first. The streaks of amber in it had not gone away in the night, the way he had half believed they might. They had, if anything, settled. The light caught in them now in the way light catches in good metal. His eyes were the green he had been told all his life were his mother's eyes, but the green had a small bright kernel in the iris where there had not been one yesterday, and the kernel had a tiny moving heart that was not quite still. His skin was warm. He could see the warmth of it in the mirror, a faint pink under the surface, the color of a child who has just come in from the cold, without the cold. He looked at the bird on his shoulder. The bird opened one eye, considered him from approximately 3 inches away, and closed the eye again. "Right," Harry said quietly. "We had better go to breakfast." Downstairs, Hagrid was sitting at the same table he had sat at the day before, and the breakfast he had ordered was a campaign rather than a meal. He looked up when Harry came down. He looked at the bird. He looked at Harry. He looked at the bird again. "That," said Hagrid carefully, "is Fawkes." "Yes," said Harry, "that is Professor Dumbledore's phoenix." "All right, that is Professor Dumbledore's phoenix on your shoulder." "Yes." Hagrid put down his fork. He picked it up again. He put it down. "Harry," he said, "the headmaster's bird hasn't left his side in 3 decades, near as I can tell. Not for a night, not for a meal. They go everywhere together. They've gone everywhere together since before I was at this school." He looked at the bird. The bird, with the unhurried courtesy of a guest, looked back at him. "He must have come yesterday. He must have come in the evening. I don't, Harry, this is not a small thing. You know that, don't you?" "I'm beginning to," said Harry. He sat down. He poured himself a cup of tea. He was warm. He was at the correct temperature. "Should I send him back?" The bird turned its head on his shoulder, exactly the angle required to look at Hagrid with one polite, incredulous eye. Hagrid laughed, a great low sound, halfway between a snort and a groan, and shook his head and said, "I don't think you could send him back if you tried, Harry. I don't think anyone could. That bird's made up his mind." "All right, then." "All right, then," Hagrid echoed, and applied himself to his eggs. They went to the station together. They did not take the cart they had come down in. The bird, Hagrid said, would not enjoy that, and what the bird enjoyed had become, in the course of one breakfast, a thing of some interest to Hagrid. They took a taxi instead. The driver did not see the bird. He saw a coat that moved in an interesting way around the boy's shoulder, and decided not to ask about it. He drove them to King's Cross at the calm pace of a man who has decided the morning is going to remain ordinary by force of will. Platform 9 3/4 was already loud when they got there. Mothers were kissing children. Children were not yet kissing each other. Trunks were going by on trolleys piloted by older boys who pretended their younger sisters were not following them. The Hogwarts Express stood in a great low hot column of steam, and the steam smelled of soot and pine and something else that did not belong to engines, but did belong to schools. Heads turned when Harry came through the brick. He had been ready for this, in the way one is ready for a thing one has been told about. He had not been ready for the scale of it. The conversations around him paused as the wave of attention spread outward from him, paused, hung, resumed at a quieter pitch. He was aware of the eyes on his hair, on his forehead, on his eyes. He was aware of the bird on his shoulder. He was aware that the bird was, in itself, the larger of the 2 strangenesses he had brought to the platform. Hagrid put a hand on his back, very lightly, and steered him toward the train. "Find a compartment," Hagrid said. "Settle in, I'll see you at the feast tonight. Don't fall off the train, don't let anyone bother you. If anyone bothers you, come find me." He paused. "Don't lose the bird." "All right," said Harry. "Good lad," said Hagrid. He squeezed Harry's shoulder very gently, the way a man squeezes a small thing he is afraid of breaking, and stepped back. The whistle blew. Harry climbed up onto the train. The bird folded its wings closer against him. The forward compartments were full. The middle compartments were full. He worked his way down the corridor, opening doors politely, finding faces that turned to look at him, and then, in stages, turned to look at the bird, and apologizing politely for the intrusion, and closing the doors again. He came at last to a compartment near the back of the train in which there was, instead of a group of friends, a single boy with red hair sitting alone on the bench, looking at his hands, and a sandwich beside him on a piece of brown paper. The red-haired boy looked up. "Sorry," said Harry, "everywhere else is full. Can I sit?" "Yeah, course," said the red-haired boy in the easy tone of someone who has not yet recognized the person speaking to him and is therefore being himself. "Plenty of," he broke off. He looked at Harry's hair, he looked at Harry's eyes, he looked at the bird, he looked at Harry's forehead. He went by degrees an interesting shade of pink. "You're that sorry, come in, sit, I'm Ron Weasley." "Harry," said Harry, who had decided last night, lying in bed with the bird against his neck, that he was going to be calm about all of this if he had to fake the calm for the next 7 years. The alternative was unbearable. "Harry Potter." "Yeah," said Ron. "Yeah, I figured." Harry sat down opposite him, the bird stayed on his shoulder. Ron stared at the bird looked back at Ron without commitment. "Is that," said Ron. "Yes," said Harry. "That's a yes." "How did you?" "He arrived," said Harry. "Last night. I haven't decided what to call him yet. Hagrid says his name is Fawkes." "Fawkes," Ron said in a small voice. "Fawkes, like the headmaster's, yes," said Harry. "He says it is the headmaster's. He came to find me." Ron sat back. He had the look of a man who has been brought a meal he was not braced for and has decided to be polite to it. "Right," he said. "Well, I have a sandwich. Mum made it. It's corned beef. She forgets that I don't like corned beef. Do you want it?" "Thank you," said Harry, who had decided last night that he was going to say thank you to every offered thing for the next year on principle. "Yes." The compartment door slid open. A girl stood in it. She was a girl with very curly brown hair held back in a way that suggested either she had brushed it twice this morning or she had given up on it entirely. She had a book under one arm. She had robes on already. Her teeth were a little prominent. She looked, all the way through the door frame, the way people look on the first day of a new school, alert at a level just past comfortable, prepared to be wrong about 3 things in a row. "Has anyone seen a toad?" she said. "A boy named Neville has lost his toad. I am helping him look for it. He is very upset. I am trying to ask in every compartment systematically." Her eyes went to Ron, then to Harry, then to the bird. Her eyes lingered on the bird. The eyes did not widen. They narrowed slightly in the way of an eye doing arithmetic. "That is a phoenix," she said. "Yes," said Harry. "On your shoulder." "Yes. Phoenixes do not perch on people," she said. "I read 4 books about magical creatures this summer, and 3 of them said so. They roost in high places, and they accompany particular wizards by choice. They do not perch on people they have just met." She paused. "Have you met him before?" "Last night," said Harry. She closed the compartment door behind her. She did this without asking. She sat down on the bench beside Ron, who scooted with reflexive politeness an inch closer to the window. She put her book on her lap. She folded her hands on top of the book. She looked at Harry. "My name is Hermione Granger," she said. "I am Muggle-born. I have read all of the prescribed textbooks and 4 supplementary books and a partial of a 5th. I would like to ask you some questions, if I may. I appreciate that you may not be able to answer all of them or any of them. I will not be offended if you cannot. I would like to ask them anyway because something has happened to you that I have read about exactly twice and once was in a footnote." She paused. "What is your name?" "Harry Potter," said Harry. She nodded once, the small decisive nod of a person ticking a box. "I thought as much. I read about you in 3 of the textbooks, the ones about modern history. They were brief and contradictory, which is how I know they are not where I should be reading. I have a question." "All right," said Harry. "On your 11th birthday," she said, "did anything physically unusual happen to your person?" Harry looked at her. He looked at Ron, who was, gently and with great determination, not interfering. He looked back at her. He found that he was already, after 1 minute in her company, prepared to tell her the truth, which surprised him. "Yes," he said. "Did you," she said, "experience a sensation of internal warmth not attributable to environmental temperature?" "Yes." "Did the warmth," she said, "subjectively feel located behind the sternum or in the central upper torso?" "Behind the sternum," said Harry. "Did any part of your body," she said, "produce, expel, exhale, or otherwise externalize a substance, physical or magical, at midnight or in the immediate vicinity of midnight?" "My scar opened," said Harry. "Something came out of it. It looked like a moth made of smoke. It died in the air above my forehead and disappeared." Hermione closed her eyes for a long moment, the way a person closes them at the news of an outcome they had hoped for but not expected. She opened them. She did not smile. Her face had gone, instead, very calm. "And finally," she said, "has the maturation event produced visible somatic changes? I can see your hair. I can see your eyes. Are there other changes that you have noticed?" "My skin's warm," said Harry, "all the time. The temperature I think I'm meant to be." "Excellent," she said quietly to herself. She paused. "Mr. Potter, I am not a person who reaches conclusions quickly. I have a working hypothesis. I do not want to tell you what it is yet, because if I tell you what it is, I will color the rest of what we observe, and I would prefer not to do that. I would prefer to read more. I would like, if you do not object, to spend much of this train ride and a portion of this term reading you everything I can find on this. Is that acceptable to you?" "Yes," said Harry. "Very." "Thank you," she said. She tilted her head at the bird. The bird tilted its head back. They regarded one another with what Harry thought was a kind of mutual professional respect. "Mr. Phoenix," she said, "I will not be offended if you do not consent to be studied. I am happy to look at you from across the compartment." The bird hopped once from Harry's shoulder to the small folding table between them and stood there, very politely, the way a cat consents to be photographed by a tourist who has asked nicely. Hermione, very seriously, took a small notebook out of her sleeve and a pencil and began to write down a series of careful sentences about its plumage. "You're brilliant," said Ron slowly to no one in particular. "Thank you," said Hermione, not looking up. "I wasn't sure," said Ron. "I was prepared to be annoyed. I was already drafting being annoyed. I am not now annoyed." "That is gracious of you, Mr. Weasley," said Hermione. "Ron, Ron." The Hogwarts Express began, with a great low sigh, to move. The countryside slid past the window. Hermione wrote. Ron, after some thought, produced from his trunk a chess set with pieces that argued with each other quietly when the lid was open, and asked Harry, with great care, whether he played, and was relieved to discover that Harry did not, and offered to teach him. The bird watched the chess. The bird watched Ron lose a knight, and lift its head 1/4 of an inch, and lower it again, the avian equivalent of a small private chuckle. Hermione looked up once, asked Harry whether she might examine the silver line on his forehead, looked at it with the focused attention of a watchmaker, said thank you, and returned to her notes. At 1 o'clock, a trolley came through with sweets. Ron, who had taken back his corned beef sandwich and was eating it without enthusiasm, looked at the trolley with the resignation of a boy whose pockets contained no money. Harry bought one of everything. He paid in the small, heavy gold coins that had come from Vault 687. He laid out the pile of sweets on the small folding table once the trolley had moved on. Ron looked at the pile. Harry pushed half of it toward him without speaking. Ron looked at the pile in front of himself. Ron's face did a small private thing. Ron, who had not been brought up to refuse food, did not refuse food and said, "Thanks," and ate a chocolate frog. The compartment door slid open again. This time it was the pale boy from Madame Malkin's. He had 2 larger boys with him, one on either side, with the expressionless faces of bodyguards who had not yet been taught to look intelligent. The pale boy had taken some care with his appearance since yesterday. He had a green and silver scarf at his throat that did not yet need to be there. "Potter," he said. "Malfoy," said Harry. The pale boy looked at the bird on the table. He looked at the chess set. He looked at Ron, dismissed Ron with the small, expensive movement of his eyebrows, looked at Hermione, dismissed her with the same movement, and looked back at Harry. The dismissals had taken him less than 2 seconds. "I came to introduce myself properly," he said. We met yesterday under inconvenient circumstances. My father is well. My father has asked me to extend his courtesies." "Has he?" said Harry. He had not realized, the pale boy said, choosing each word as carefully as a man crossing a marsh, "the manner of your return to society. He has corrected the misimpression. He sends his regards." He inclined his head. The inclination was small. It was not, however, none. "I will see you at school," he said, and withdrew and slid the door closed behind him. Hermione, who had not looked up the entire exchange, made one further small note in her book. "That family," she said quietly, "has been making a series of urgent decisions in the last several hours. The decisions are not yet good ones. I am curious to see whether they become good ones." "What kind of decisions?" said Ron, who had stiffened at the name Malfoy in a way Harry had stored away for asking about later. "They have evidently received information from a source they trust," Hermione said. "The information is that Mr. Potter is now a person who must be received politely, rather than a person whom one might harm without consequence. They have been quick to update. They have not been quick enough." She closed the notebook. She looked out the window. "There are a great many people who are going to have made decisions like this in the last day. Some of them will turn out to be more elegant than others." "What kind of information?" said Ron. Hermione looked at him. She looked at Harry. "I shall tell you when I have read more," she said. "I have a hypothesis. I will not name it yet." Harry looked at her, and then at the bird, and then at Ron, and felt, somewhere just below his sternum where the warm thing lived, that he had gotten very lucky in a particular small way that he had not earned, and that he was going to spend a long time being grateful for it without saying so out loud. He ate another chocolate frog. The school appeared in the dusk the way a small mountain appears in a dream, not at once, but in the slow accumulation of detail. Lanterns came first, like stars that had decided to go lower. Then towers. Then the long black water of the lake, with the boats that took the first years across, 2 by 2, on water that did not quite ripple. The bird left Harry's shoulder during the crossing and flew, in a long low loop ahead of the boats, and waited for them on the far shore in the manner of an officer who has gone forward to confirm the road. Hagrid was there. Hagrid took one look at the bird, took another, longer look at Harry, and said with infinite tiredness, "All right. Up to the castle. The bird is with us. The bird is fine. Up we go." The entrance hall was loud with the noise of 100-odd children too tired to be properly excited. The doors at the far end of it were doors of the kind one stops at, and Harry stopped at them, and Hermione stopped beside him, and Ron stopped on his other side, and a tall, stern witch named Professor McGonagall told them, in a voice that did not need volume to take command of a room, what was about to happen. She said sorting. She said houses. She said points. She said please stand quietly and follow me. She paused at the end, looking at Harry, looking at the bird settled again on his shoulder, looking at the silver line on his forehead. Her face, the face that had stood in front of 47 generations of children and not been moved by any of them, moved an inch. It was not surprise. It was the resigned welcome of a teacher who is meeting a problem she has been told she would meet and has not, until now, been able to plan for. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Ma'am, that is the headmaster's phoenix." "Yes, ma'am. Did you bring it with you onto the train this morning?" "No, ma'am, it brought itself." She looked at him for several seconds. The corner of her mouth did something that was, in another face, a smile. "Very well," she said. "Follow me." The great hall was a great room with no ceiling. It had stars where its ceiling should have been. The ceiling pretended to be sky. 4 long tables ran the length of it, full of students who looked up, and went on looking up, and slowly, by rows and by the small wave of head-turning that ran along their benches, fell quiet. The head table was at the far end. The headmaster sat in the middle of it. He was a tall, white-bearded man whose face Harry recognized from one of the chocolate frog cards he had eaten that afternoon. The man wore robes of midnight blue. He was watching the first years come in with the patient, gentle attention of a grandfather waiting for grandchildren to arrive at a Christmas. He looked at Harry. His expression did not change. The expression had been arranged in advance for a meeting it had been preparing to have. The expression met its meeting. Then he saw the bird. His face did a small, precise thing it had probably not done in 50 years. The bird, on Harry's shoulder, opened both eyes and tilted its head, very politely, in the direction of the head table. It did not move from Harry's shoulder. It did not lift a wing. It simply tilted its head, with the small, still respect of an old servant greeting an employer he has decided, regrettably, to leave. Albus Dumbledore, who had not been visibly surprised since 1953, did not react. His face arranged itself again, after the small, precise thing, back into warm grandfather. The eyes behind the half-moon glasses, however, did not arrange themselves. The eyes looked, for a very long instant, at the bird on Harry's shoulder, and at Harry's smooth, scarless forehead, and at the amber-streaked hair, and at the warm flame green eyes, and they took a careful, complete inventory of what they were looking at. Then the eyes, too, arranged themselves back into kindness. He inclined his head, just slightly, the way a host inclines his head to a guest of distinction he has been told to expect, and has not, until this moment, met. The bird inclined its head back at exactly the same angle. McGonagall set down a four-legged stool in front of the head table. On the stool, she placed an old patched pointed hat. The hat sat for a moment in silence. Then a rip near its brim opened, and the hat sang. The song was the song the hat sang every year, only some of which Harry heard. He was, by then, in a private place behind his eyes where the singing did not have to reach. The bird on his shoulder breathed against his neck. The fire in his chest was awake and quiet at once. The names began. Abbot Hannah and the small blonde girl at the front of the line went up and sat on the stool and was sorted into Hufflepuff and walked, careful and pink, to a cheering table. Bones, Susan, Boot, Terry, Granger, Hermione. Hermione walked up. Hermione sat down. The hat thought for a moment longer than the other hats had thought, and then the hat said, Gryffindor, and Hermione walked away with the small flicker of relief of a person who has been told that her preferred destination has been confirmed. Malfoy, Draco. The hat barely touched his head before it said the word. Harry had time to wonder whether the hat had been deciding or merely catching up. Potter Harry. The hall, which had been quiet, became more quiet. Harry walked. He did not look at the tables. He looked at the stool. He sat. McGonagall lifted the hat. The bird on his shoulder did not move. McGonagall paused. She had not plainly planned for this. She lowered the hat over Harry's head anyway, and the brim caught the bird's wing, and the bird, with the small dignity of a great uncle being handed a hat by a niece, leaned aside, and the hat went on over Harry's eyes. In the dark under the hat said in a small considering voice, "Oh, oh dear," said the hat. "Oh dear, dear, dear." What, said Harry, into the dark inside his own head. "You are an unusual situation," said the hat. "I have not, well, in fairness, I have had unusual situations. I would not say this is the most unusual, but this is in the top 6. This is well into the top 10. I am thinking, what is wrong? Nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong. Several things are interesting. You have a great deal of courage, which is convenient, but courage is one of those qualities one finds in everyone if one cares to look. You have a quick, small mind, which would suit Ravenclaw, although Ravenclaw is not where you wish to go. You have a deep particular loyalty to a very small number of people, none of whom you have met yet, but 2 of whom you will be sharing breakfast with for some time, which would suit Hufflepuff. And you have, behind all of that, and I will say this carefully, a great, large, quiet thing under your sternum, which I do not particularly know how to sort. It is not, with any meaningful precision, a personality trait. I do not have a house for it. I do not know that any of the founders had a house for it. They were dead before this kind of thing happened in a school. "What is it?" said Harry. "It is what is on your shoulder," said the hat, "and also what is under your skin. I will not name it. It is not for me to name. Where would you like to go?" Harry thought. He thought of Hermione walking away with her small flicker of relief. He thought of Ron, who had pushed an inch toward the window for a girl he had not yet met because that was who Ron Weasley was. He thought of the boy with the white blonde hair, whose father had revised opinions in the last 24 hours. "Gryffindor," he said. "Gryffindor," said the hat. "Gryffindor, then. I do not know that it makes very much difference to you in the end. But Gryffindor will be glad to have you, and Gryffindor will be more glad to have you than Slytherin would have made itself. And on balance, I think the world will be a tidier place if the hat broke off. The hat made, on its inside, a small noise. "Oh," said the hat. "What? I had been about to put you in Gryffindor anyway," said the hat, "but your bird has just made it very clear to me that putting you anywhere else would be informal. I am being chivied by a bird." I had not been chivied by a bird in my hearing in 14 centuries. A pause. Gryffindor. The last word went out into the hall as a shout. Harry took the hat off. The Gryffindor table, on his left, erupted in a cheer that had a strange edge in it. The Hufflepuffs at the next table looked at one another. The Ravenclaws on the other side looked at the bird. The Slytherins at the far table did not look at anything in particular. They looked, in a careful, coordinated way, at their own plates. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table. Ron, who had not yet been sorted, gave him a small thumbs up from the line of waiting first years. Hermione, halfway down the table, slid over to make room. Harry sat. The bird, who had not moved, settled itself again on his shoulder. Across the hall, on a heavy gold perch beside the head table, there was an empty space where the bird had been for 30 years. The space was not vast in size. The space was vast in a different way. Albus Dumbledore did not look at the perch. Albus Dumbledore looked at his plate. Albus Dumbledore had the polite, considered face of a man who is finishing the chapter he is on. The remaining sortings went quickly. Ron was sorted to Gryffindor, sat down opposite Harry with great relief, and was given a chicken leg by Hermione, who had decided to be in charge of feeding everyone in her general vicinity. The feast arrived. Plates that had been empty became full. The hall began to make the great hum of children rediscovering that they had been hungry. Dumbledore stood. The hall fell quiet. "Welcome," said the headmaster, "to another year at Hogwarts. Before we eat, I should like to say a very few words. They are these: nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak." He sat down again. The hall laughed with the practiced laughter of children who had been waiting to be allowed to laugh. The plates filled themselves a second time. The pudding came. Through the entire meal, the headmaster did not look at Harry. He looked, several times, in the direction of Harry. He made it appear that he was looking at the Gryffindor table generally, or at the windows above them, or at the candle floating above McGonagall. He did not, however, look at Harry. The bird on Harry's shoulder did not look at the headmaster either. The two of them had, by some private agreement Harry had not been consulted on, settled into the polite mutual not-looking of people who are about to have a conversation later. At the end of the feast, the older Gryffindors stood to lead the first years to the tower. Harry rose. The bird rose with him. Around him, the hall was doing its slow, noisy emptying. A hand touched his elbow. He turned. A tall, thin man with a black robe and a black curtain of hair and a pale face stood there. The man had not announced himself. The man had arrived as a quiet weather. Harry did not need to be told who he was. Hagrid had described him on the boat across the lake in the careful, diplomatic way one describes a colleague to a child who is going to meet the colleague. Snape. Severus Snape. Potions. He is not a warm man, Harry. Don't expect warm. Don't blame him for not being warm. He is owed his own privacy. Don't blame him. "Mr. Potter," said the man. "Sir, I do not expect to see you in my classroom until Friday morning. I would like to speak with you for a moment now." "All right, sir." Snape walked. Harry followed. The bird on Harry's shoulder was still. They walked together into the small antechamber off the side of the hall where the first years had waited earlier to be sorted. Snape pulled the door closed behind them. The candle on the table was guttering. The candle steadied. Snape did not steady. Snape was a man who had been steady, Harry thought, since before he had learned to walk. He merely stood, with his arms at his sides, and looked at Harry. And the look was a thorough and clinical look that took several long seconds, and during which Harry did not move. "Your mother," Snape said at the end, in a voice that did not have very much air in it, "told me once that her grandmother had been a witch of some particular kind. She would not tell me what kind. She said it was a family matter. I assumed that her grandmother had been a Vila or a part Vila, because there is a certain redness in the hair of some women in your family which I had taken for that. I was wrong. I find tonight, very wrong." He paused. He drew breath. "Mr. Potter, I will not be a kind teacher. I will not be the teacher you would like. I will not address you with affection. I will not address you with cruelty either. I will address you as I address all of my students as a young person with a wand who must be persuaded into the discipline of an extremely dangerous craft. We are clear on this?" "Yes, sir." Snape paused again. He looked at the bird. The bird looked at Snape. Whatever passed between Snape and the bird passed without further words. Snape did a thing he had not done in front of a student in 20 years. He inclined his head. It was a small bow. It was a precise bow. It was a bow of 1 degree more than nothing, and 1 degree less than ostentation. It was the bow of a Slytherin who has been raised on the careful etiquette of an older world, and who has identified in front of him a thing the older world had a word for. "Heir of the Phoenix line," he said quietly. "I had thought the line ended. I see that it did not." "I do not know what that means, sir," said Harry. "You will," said Snape. "You will be told what it means by men who are better placed to tell you than I am. I will not be the one to tell you. I will only mark, for the present, that I have recognized you." He paused. "You will be safe in this castle in a way you have not yet been safe in your life, Mr. Potter. I will not be the most expressive of the people who keeps you so. I will nonetheless be among them. We are clear on that?" "Yes, sir." "Off to your tower, then. Good night." "Good night, sir." Harry went out. The bird went with him. Snape stood for a moment in the antechamber with his hands folded behind his back and looked at the guttering candle and did not say anything else, and after a while blew the candle out. In Wiltshire, in a dust-soft library that no one had entered all evening, the cabinet on the third wall stood with one of its glass doors very slightly ajar. The maid who would find it in the morning would find that the wood inside the lower shelf had blackened in a small, careful rectangle, the precise shape and size of a book that was no longer there. She would, when she had reported it to Mrs. Malfoy, be instructed not to mention it again. The cabinet would be cleaned. The shelf would be replaced. The blackened rectangle, beneath the new shelf, would remain. In the headmaster's tower, Albus Dumbledore stood at the window with his hands behind his back and looked out at the dark grounds. The empty perch behind him was a small private fact he had not yet decided how to live alongside. He was a man who, in his career, had outlived several of his more important certainties. He was good at outliving certainties. He was less good at outliving birds. He stood at the window for a long time. He did not look behind him. After a while he said, in a quiet voice, to nobody in particular, "Well, that answers that." Then he went, slowly, to his desk and sat down, and wrote a letter to Madame Pomfrey requesting that she examine, in the morning, a boy whose forehead might have, very recently, become an unusual kind of clean. In Gryffindor Tower, in the dormitory at the top of the spiral stairs, Harry Potter laid himself down in a 4-poster bed for the first occasion in his life, and the bird folded itself on the pillow beside his head, and Ron Weasley, in the next bed over, fell asleep with the boneless completeness of a boy whose home had always been a noisy one, and who therefore did not know how to sleep in silence. Harry listened to Ron's breath. He listened to the bird's small, slow heartbeat. He listened, somewhere on the wind outside the leaded window, to the distant too-wit of an owl arriving on the school's many low ledges, with a parcel for some patient student. He thought of his Aunt Petunia, with her tea and her unlooked-for tears and her small wave at the gate. He thought, briefly and without bitterness, of Vernon. He thought of the kitchen clock striking midnight, 12 and 12, and the small black moth dying in the air above his forehead. It had been a long day. It had been a long 2 days. He fell asleep with the bird's wing folded against the side of his neck, and the candle flickered down on the bedside, and the school around him breathed its slow, ancient sleeping breath, and somewhere, far away in Wiltshire, a small ash shape settled finally into a shelf, and the air above it was at peace. Chapter 3: The Letter in the Vault. Hermione Granger's research program, drafted at 6:30 on the second morning of school in a copybook she had labeled Notes, Personal, ran to 14 items and 3 appendices. She had brought the copybook down to breakfast. She had eaten the breakfast in a rapid, functional way that did not interfere with the copybook. She had a fresh pencil, sharpened with the small silver knife her father had given her for her 10th birthday, and which she had not yet decided whether to disclose to a teacher. The copybook lay open between her toast and Ron Weasley's bacon. First item, she said, in the calm, low voice of someone presenting a plan to a committee that does not yet know it is on a committee, is to find every book in the Hogwarts library which contains the word phoenix. Second item is to find every book which contains the words creature inheritance. Third item is to find every book which contains the words blood glamour. Fourth item, Ron, are you listening? Yeah, said Ron. Phoenix, inheritance, glamour, I'm listening. I'm eating and I'm listening. I am multitasking. Fourth item is to identify any book on family lineage which mentions the name Evans. Fifth item is to identify any book which mentions the name Potter. There's going to be a lot of those last ones, said Ron. I am aware, Ron, said Hermione. I am hoping to find a particular sort of which there will be fewer than I fear and more than I would like. Sixth item, Harry, is more sensitive. I would like to know if you would be willing to be examined by Madame Pomfrey. The bird on Harry's shoulder opened one eye. Within reason, Harry said. I have already been examined by Madame Pomfrey. Yesterday. Twice. I had noted that, said Hermione. I would like the results of those examinations, if she will share them with you, and if you will share them with me. I will not ask for them otherwise. All right. Seventh item is to write to the British and Irish Magical Creature Society and ask whether they have any records on living phoenixes that have lately changed companions. Eighth item is to consult Madame Pince on the existence of restricted books on creature inheritance, which I suspect exist, and which will require either a teacher's signature or a great deal of cunning to access. I am willing to attempt cunning. Ninth item, how many items are there, Hermione? Said Ron, with the patient curiosity of a boy who has decided that being friends with this girl is going to be educational. 14, said Hermione, with 3 appendices. All right. Ninth item, said Hermione, is to consult the genealogical records at the ministry. This is impossible from Hogwarts. I have included it for completeness. 10th item, however, is possible from Hogwarts. The black Lestrange Prewett Weasley wall tapestry in the corridor outside Professor Babbling's classroom, which I have been told is a fragment of an older and longer tapestry now in 3 pieces. It records intermarriage among the 18 oldest magical families in Britain. The Evans family is not on it. The maternal lines of those families are, however, recorded going back as many as 20 generations. There is a chance that one of them married out in the 1820s or earlier in a way that resulted in your great-grandmother. Wait, Ron said. What do you mean, great-grandmother? Hermione looked at him over her pencil. It is the working hypothesis I have not yet named. I will name it shortly. We are nearly to the 11th item. You're terrifying, said Ron with admiration. When you grow up, you should be a barrister or a general or a minister or all of those. Thank you, Ron, said Hermione. She turned a page. 11th item is, an owl came in through the upper window. It was not the Morning Post owl. It came in by a window that was not used for the Morning Post. It came in low, in a long, shallow glide that took it the length of the Great Hall, and it landed beside Harry's juice with the small, expert thump of a bird that had been told its exact destination. It was a heavy, short-necked owl, the color of polished bronze, and it carried in its beak a single white envelope sealed with a red wax disc. On the disc was a small, neat impression of a crown. The Great Hall went, by waves, quieter. The bird on Harry's shoulder, which had not moved in some minutes, examined the owl with one eye, and the owl looked back at the bird, and the small mute exchange between them was, Harry thought, the avian equivalent of 2 diplomats meeting at a station and exchanging a small piece of knotted protocol. The owl pushed the envelope toward Harry's hand, and having delivered, stood very still, waiting. That is a Gringotts seal, said Hermione, in a different voice from the one she had been using. The copybook had closed itself in front of her. That is the director's seal. I read about it in Goblin Heraldry and Custom. Harry picked up the envelope. The wax was warm. He did not for a moment want to open it. The warmth had the strange, particular warmth of a thing freshly addressed to him by someone who had been thinking about him with care. He turned it over. On the back, in elegant copperplate, was his name, Mr. Harry James Potter, C.O. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and beneath his name a single short line, at your earliest convenience. He broke the seal. The letter inside it was on a single sheet of paper the color of clean cream. It was written in a hand that had clearly been chosen to be readable by a child, although the writer's natural hand was visible underneath, faint and goblin-angular, like a pencil tracing under ink. Mr. Potter, a standing instruction has been left at this bank by your mother, Mrs. Lily Potter, née Evans, dated 30 July 1981, to be acted upon when the bearer of this letter yourself becomes available for it. Some part of the instructions' contents are time-sensitive and may not be discussed in correspondence. We respectfully request your attendance at our London office in person on the soonest day that may be arranged with your school. We are prepared to receive you at any hour. A representative will arrive at the gates of your school today at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to escort you and any persons of your choosing. Yours, Ragnarok the 7th. Director Gringotts. He read it once. He read it twice. He read it 3 times. He passed it across to Hermione. Hermione read it twice with the careful, unhurried precision of someone who was making her face do nothing in particular while her thoughts did several things at once. She passed it to Ron. Ron read it once slowly and said, "Blimey," in a voice that contained the entire emotion Ron had been raised by older brothers not to put a name to. Hermione put down the letter. She picked up the copybook. She turned to a clean page. She wrote at the top, Item 0, and beneath it, Attend the bank. Bring questions. She looked up. May I come, Harry? Of course. Thank you. I will bring a fresh quill. Can I come? Said Ron, who plainly did not expect a yes and was prepared for a no and was therefore startled when Harry said, without any hesitation, Yes, both of you, of course. Ron looked at his plate. Ron picked up his bacon. Ron put it down. Ron said in a slightly different voice from the one he had been using, All right then, all right, thanks. And he ate the bacon with concentration. Professor McGonagall, when consulted, did not appear surprised by the letter. She read it as one might read a letter one has been expecting for some time, and folded it neatly, and handed it back, and said, 3 o'clock, Mr. Potter. Take Miss Granger and Mr. Weasley with you. I will speak to the headmaster. I will speak to the director. You will return by curfew. You will eat the dinner that the school provides for you on your return. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Potter. Ma'am, your mother, said McGonagall, with the small particular kindness she allowed herself once a term and not more, was the most accomplished young witch of her year. Whatever has been kept for you has been kept by competent hands. Do not be afraid of it, be careful of it. There is a difference. Off to class. The carriage arrived at 3 o'clock exactly. It was not the kind of Gringotts carriage that the bank used for its merely wealthy clients. It was the long, polished black sort with brass corners, drawn by a single creature that was not a horse. The driver was a goblin in a coat of pewter wool. He did not introduce himself. He inclined his head 1 degree, opened the door for Harry. For Harry, not for any of them, he did not seem to know what to do about a Hermione or a Ron, although he held the door long enough that they had time to get in and closed the door and climbed up to his seat, and the carriage moved. The bird on Harry's shoulder settled itself for the journey. Right, said Ron, looking around at the dark velvet interior. Right, I have ridden in a flying car once against my mother's express wishes. This is fancier than the car was. This is fancier than anything has any right to be. It is meant, said Hermione, who had spent the morning in the library, to be reassuring. It is meant to signal that you are being received with the formality reserved for important clients. Goblins do not perform formality for ordinary reasons. They perform formality as a kind of statement. The statement is being made for our benefit, but also for the benefit of the people who will be told, later this afternoon, that this carriage was used. Who'll be told? Anyone who matters, said Hermione, with the small, unsentimental certainty of a child who had read several books on diplomacy in a single summer. The journey was short. London came in through the windows in flashes, the slate gray of the Thames, the brown shoulder of a building, the green of a small park, and then the carriage drew up beneath an arch in a courtyard Harry did not recognize, and the goblin opened the door, and a second goblin in a coat of plum velvet was waiting on the step with a small lantern, although there was no need for a lantern in the afternoon. Mr. Potter, said this second goblin. Welcome, I am Swordrop. I will conduct you to the director." "Thank you," said Harry. "Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley." Swordrop did not say welcome to either of them. He said their names, which was, by goblin standards, a courtesy. They went in through a side door Harry had not seen on his first visit. They went down a corridor lined with portraits of goblins he had not heard of, who watched them go past with the careful, uninflected attention of clerks watching a customer go to a window. They went down a flight of stone steps. They went along another corridor. They came to a tall, narrow door of dark wood, on which, low down, was carved the same small impression of a crown that had been on the wax seal. Swordrop knocked. A voice from inside the door said, "Enter." The room beyond was small and bright and old, a room with stone walls and one long deep window and a single tall desk. The goblin behind the desk did not stand when they came in. He raised his head from the ledger he had been writing in, set down the quill, looked at Harry, and Harry felt himself looked at the way a coin is looked at by a man who has been told he might find one of unusual age. "Mr. Potter," said the goblin, "I am Ragnarok." "Sir." "Sit, please, all of you. I have arranged a chair for each of you. Yes, you, the young lady, may take notes. I had assumed you would wish to." Hermione, in the act of pulling out her copybook, paused fractionally and pulled the copybook out the rest of the way and sat and opened the copybook. "Thank you, sir," she said. "You are welcome, Miss Granger." The director sat back in his chair, which was a chair built for a goblin and which therefore did not creak under him. He folded his hands. He looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter, I have asked you here for a reason which will, in due course, surprise you. Before I tell you the reason, I am going to tell you the rules." "All right, sir." "The rules," said Ragnarok, "are as follows. Your mother left this bank a series of instructions on the 30th of July, 1981, the day before her death. The instructions were left under a goblin oath which I personally witnessed. The oath is binding. The instructions cannot be altered, retracted, or read out by any person other than yourself, in person, in this bank, at the time the instructions become operative. They are now operative. The instructions become operative when one of three conditions is met. The first condition is your 17th birthday. The second condition is your marriage. The third condition is, and I am reading from the original document, the event of his inheritance, should it come early. The third condition was met on Tuesday last." Harry sat very still. The bird on his shoulder leaned, infinitesimally, against the side of his neck. "Sir," said Hermione, looking up from her copybook, "I beg your pardon. May I ask whether the instructions specified what inheritance meant?" "They did, Miss Granger. They specified creature inheritance in those words. The bank has, in our custody, an instrument which can detect this event in any of our clients. The instrument was triggered at midnight on the 31st of July, 1991. We have been waiting for Mr. Potter to be available since." He paused. "Mr. Potter, the instructions are these. You are to be conducted to a vault which has been held under your mother's name in a sublevel of this bank. The vault contains a small number of personal items. One of these items is a letter, addressed to you, in your mother's hand. The vault will respond to your handprint and to no other. Once you are inside, you may read what is there. You may take what you wish to take. You may leave what you wish to leave. The vault, in either case, will remain open to you for the remainder of your life." He paused. He looked at Harry. He waited. "All right, sir," said Harry, in a voice that was steady but had become, in the last several seconds, slightly quieter. "I would like to go to the vault." "Yes," said Ragnarok. "Swordrop will take you." "Sir," said Harry, "may my friends come with me as far as is permitted? They may come to the door of the vault. They may not enter unless you invite them. The vault will not stop them if you do." "Thank you, sir." "Mr. Potter." "Sir?" "I am instructed to tell you one thing more. I am to read it to you exactly. Tell my son there is no obligation. He may read the letter or not read the letter. He may go inside or stay outside. He may decide to know or not to know. I am not asking him to do anything. I am only telling him that there is a thing here if he wants it." Ragnarok paused. "Those are the words she gave me." Harry did not say anything for a moment. The bird on his shoulder was very warm against his neck. Hermione, beside him, had stopped writing and was holding her pencil with both hands. "I would like to go," he said. Swordrop conducted them. They went down. They did not take a cart this time. They went down on a stone staircase that wound around and around inside a shaft cooler than the surface, and the staircase had small lamps in iron brackets, and the lamps did not flicker. They went down past the level Harry had visited the first time. They went down past 2 more levels marked with goblin numerals. They came at last to a small landing where a single door was set into the wall, plain wood, with a single brass plate. The plate said, in Goblin and in English, L.E. Potter. Harry put his hand on it. The door was warm under his palm. He realized, after a moment, that the warmth was not the door's warmth. The warmth was his. He moved his hand. There was a small click. The brass plate moved a fraction. Swordrop, who had stepped back to the foot of the stairs, said, "It is unlocked, Mr. Potter," in a voice so quiet it was nearly not a voice at all. The door opened. The room inside was small. It was the size of a bathroom. It had stone walls and a single small stand in the middle of it. On the stand, 3 things had been laid out, in the patient, careful arrangement of someone who had had time to think about how she would like them to be found. A folded square of red silk. A small portrait in a wooden frame, no larger than a hand, leaning back on a tiny easel. An envelope. The envelope said, on its face, Harry, in a young woman's handwriting that he had never seen, but that he recognized the way the inside of a bone recognizes the marrow. He stood in the doorway. The bird on his shoulder did not stir. Behind him, Hermione, in a very small voice, said, "Harry, we can wait here. We do not have to come in. We will wait here as long as you need." "No," said Harry after a moment, and his voice was the kind of steady that has been put together out of careful pieces, like a small wall. "Number, come in, please." They came in. He went to the stand. He picked up the envelope. He turned it over. The seal was a small red wax disc with no crown on it. It was a plain disc. She had not had any seal of her own then. He broke the wax with his thumb. He took out the letter. The letter was in the same hand as the envelope, and the hand was steady, and the ink had not faded. He understood, with a small, distant part of his mind that was watching all of this from a careful distance, that the ink had been mixed with magic of the sort that keeps a thing readable for 10 years more than it ought to be. He read, "Harry, I am writing this on the morning of the 30th of July, 1981. You are 1 year and 11 months old. You are asleep in the next room. You have been asleep for 40 minutes, and you have, in this morning's count, taken out 3 of my hairpins and lost 2 of them. I have not gone to look for the 2. I am going to write you this letter instead, and trust that you can manage to lose only the pins for 1 morning, and not anything more important. I am writing you this letter because I do not know if I am going to be the one to tell you the things in it. I would prefer to tell you the things in it myself, in person, in our kitchen, with you sitting on the table eating jam off a spoon and asking me to read it to you again. I think there is a reasonable chance that I will still get to do that. I think there is also a chance that I will not. If you are reading this, the bank tells me, then one of 3 things has happened. You have turned 17, or you have got married, which I doubt has happened first, in which case hello, and I am proud of you and you have my permission to be very happy, or your inheritance has come early. I had thought it was unlikely that it would come early. I had laid the glamour very carefully. I was taught the technique by my own mother, who was taught it by hers. 3 generations of women in my family have used it on their children, and none of those children has burned through it before adulthood. You were the 4th. The fact that you are reading this before your 17th birthday tells me that something has happened in your life which was strong enough to break the glamour from inside. I am sorry, Harry. I am sorry that something happened. I am going to tell you now what the glamour was for. My grandmother on my mother's side, your great-grandmother, was named Iris Beechwood, and she was a witch of a kind which the Wisengamot does not have a category for. Her own mother was a phoenix-bonded witch named Daphne Beechwood, and Daphne's mother was a phoenix-bonded witch named Eleanor Cole, and Eleanor's mother was a phoenix-bonded witch named Mary Cole. The line runs back, in my family Bible, to the 1650s. It runs as far back as we have written records. It will probably run further if anyone ever asks the goblins. A phoenix-bonded witch, in my family's old way of speaking, is not a witch with a phoenix familiar. That is the usual modern use of the phrase, and it is wrong. A phoenix-bonded witch is a witch in whose blood a phoenix has, very long ago, made its home. The bird does not live in her. In the literal sense, the bird lives wherever it lives. The fire of the bird, however, the slow, long-lived warmth, the kindness, the readiness to burn cleanly when burning is needed, that does live in her. It is passed down the female line. It does not always express itself in every generation. It expressed itself strongly in my grandmother. It did not express itself in my mother. It expressed itself, weakly, in my sister and in me. It will express itself in you. I have known, since you were 3 weeks old, that it would express itself in you. I do not know how I knew. I knew the way a woman knows her child has a fever before she touches his forehead. I have hidden it. I have hidden it because we are living in a time when men with very particular and very wrong ideas are walking around looking for children to make examples of. I have hidden it because a child who is half phoenix is conspicuous in a way that I cannot protect you from, not while you are very small. I have hidden it because there is a man in particular, and I will not write his name here, because I do not want him on this page with you, who would, if he knew, take a great interest in your existence. I would prefer that he did not take an interest. I would prefer to give you the chance to be a small, ordinary boy for 10 years. Harry. If you are reading this, the glamour has come down. You are not a small, ordinary boy anymore. I am sorry. I would have given you 10 ordinary years. I would have given you 20 if I could have. Here is what I want you to know about what you are. The fire in you is yours. It is not something to be afraid of. It will not eat you. It will not eat the people you love. It will, if you let it, do 3 things for you that very few wizards have access to. It will keep you warm in the way that matters, by which I do not only mean your body. It will burn out things in your blood that should not be there. It will, if you ever need it to, take the shape it has been waiting to take. The third thing I do not understand very well. The first 2 I know about. The first 2 are why I am not afraid for you, even now, writing this in the morning before I have decided what to make for our lunch. I want you to know one more thing. There is a phoenix somewhere in the world who has been watching for you. You are kin to him in a way the wizards have not got a word for. He will come if he is alive. He will know you before you know him. He will not leave you. If he is on your shoulder as you read this, do not be surprised. He is exactly where he means to be. The silk in the box is something I made for you. It is a phoenix-bonded woman's mantle in my family's old way. You do not have to wear it. You can keep it in a drawer for 40 years and look at it once a decade, and that will be fine. If you do wear it, it will be very warm. The portrait beside it is a painting of me, done 2 months ago, when I was thinking I might want one to give you one day if I ever needed to. The painting will talk to you. It cannot tell you things I did not tell the painter. It can tell you what I would say, in the rough way that paintings can. It is not very good company. It is better than nothing. Harry, my Harry, I love you. I love you whether you read this when you are 11 or 17 or 30 or 60. I love you in the morning before you have had your tea, and I love you at night after you have lost a battle, and I love you in between and around and underneath. I do not need you to do anything in particular with the love. I do not need you to do anything with this letter either. The love is yours, the way the fire is yours. They are yours to use, both of them, in whatever way suits you, and they will be in you whether you use them or not, and you are not under any obligation. Be brave when it suits you. Be kind always. Eat real food when you can. Make a friend who tells you when you are being stupid. Make another friend who tells you when you are being too clever. Find a third friend who does not tell you anything but who is glad to see you. 3 is the right number of friends. Most wizards have only one of any of those, if any at all. Your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother Mary Cole, who was an apothecary in Lambeth in 1712, once wrote that the fire in our blood was a small inheritance from a great kindness. I believe her. I have always believed her. I hope, when you have had time to live with it, you will too. All my love, all of it, always. Your mother, Lily. He read the letter once. He read it a second time. He read it a third time. The third time he read it, he was reading it very slowly, line by line, because the lines had begun to take on the small private weight that a letter takes on when it is read by a person who has had a great deal of practice not crying in front of strangers, and who has, suddenly, in a small stone room, no further use for the practice. He did not cry. He looked at the letter in his hands for a long moment, and then he folded it very carefully, along the creases his mother had folded it along, and he put it back into the envelope, and he held the envelope against his chest with both hands. Hermione was, very quietly, weeping. Ron, who had not read the letter and would not have presumed to, was looking determinedly at the wall above the stand. The bird on Harry's shoulder had its head tucked against the side of his neck and was making, in a low, slow way that was not quite a sound, a small humming that he felt rather than heard. "Hermione," he said. "Yes. Would you read it, please? I would like you to know what it says." "Are you sure?" "Yes." She took the envelope from him. She read it sitting on the small stool by the wall, and she did not say anything while she read it. And when she came to the end, her face did the small, precise sorrow of a girl who had been wanting, in some private compartment of her mind, to know that the mothers of children she liked had been wonderful, and who had just been given proof. She handed it to Ron, and Ron looked at her and looked at Harry and said, "Are you sure, Harry?" And Harry said, "Yes." Ron read it. He read it with the careful slowness of a boy who was not the fastest reader in the world, but who paid attention. When he came to the bit about the 3 friends, he looked up. She said 3 was the right number of friends. "Yes," said Harry. That's a useful thing to know. I'd like to remember her saying that. I'd like to remember her saying that." "All right," said Harry. "All right," said Ron, and gave the letter back and looked at his shoes. Harry put the letter into the inner pocket of his school robes. He picked up the small square of red silk. It was lighter than it looked. It unfolded once, twice, 3 times, into a long warm cloak the color of a slow coal, with a small ember of stitching at the collar that was, Harry realized after he looked at it for a moment, the silhouette of a bird in flight. He did not put it on. He folded it back up, twice the size of what it had been when he picked it up by his count and tucked it under his arm. Then he turned to the portrait. He picked it up. He set it down again on the stand so that he could look at it from where he was and not, somehow, the other way around. The little painted face inside the frame was very young. She was younger, he thought, than he had expected, 21, perhaps. Her hair was longer than the hair in the few photographs Aunt Petunia had not destroyed. And the painter had caught a particular small wry tip at the corner of her mouth that no photograph had been able to. She looked out of the frame, painted brown room and painted soft light behind her, and her eyes were a green he had seen every morning in mirrors his entire life. The painted face smiled. "Hello, Harry," said the painted face in a voice that was the painted approximation of a voice, a little flat and a little warm and very tired. "Look at you, you are tall." "Hello," he said. The word was not the word he had been planning to use, but it was the one he had. "You have the streaks in your hair," she said. "You have the eyes." She paused. The painted lily looked at the bird on his shoulder. "And you have him, I had wondered, I am glad. Hello, you," she said to the bird. The bird inclined its head very politely in the small wry manner of an old acquaintance. "Mum," said Harry. The painted lily did the small wry thing with the corner of her mouth, the thing the painter had caught. "Yes, love, I am not what you think I am. I am what the painter could make of me on a Thursday afternoon. I am a small part of her. The rest of her is, I'm afraid, very far away. Don't be sad about it. She wouldn't want you to. She would tell you to be sensible and to eat a good supper and to keep an eye on the boy on your right because he looks like he would be useful in a fight if you ever needed one, and to keep an eye on the girl on your left because she will outsmart you in a year and you should let her, because that is what good friends do." "All right," said Harry. "Good lad. Come and see me when you've time. Don't make a chore of it, only when you've time. The frame is yours. It goes where you go. It does not need to live in a vault. All right. Off you go, the 3 of you. There will be people who would like to hear what is in the letter. There will be people who would like to know who is allowed to know it. Be careful who you tell. Trust your headmaster, but not in everything. Trust your teacher of transfiguration in nearly everything. Trust your teacher of potions in the matter of your safety and in nothing else, because he is not very good at the rest of being trustworthy, although he is trying, the poor man." "How does she know?" said Ron in a low voice to Hermione. "How does she know about Snape? She's been in a vault since." "Sirius will come to find you," said the painted lily who had heard. "He will come once he hears. Please, when he comes, hear him out. Take your time. He has a great deal to be forgiven for on small matters. He has nothing to be forgiven for on the large one. I am tired, Harry. The painter only put a small amount of me in here, and the small amount is sleepy. Take me home." She closed her eyes. The corner of her mouth, even closed, kept the wry small tip. He picked up the portrait. He cradled it in the crook of his elbow. He turned. Hermione had put her copybook away. Ron had not, in some minutes, looked away from his shoes. The bird on Harry's shoulder lifted its head and was again the bird that had ridden the train and slept on the pillow beside his head, alert and warm and steady. "All right," he said. "Let's go." They went. In the carriage going back, Hermione did not write. She held her copybook on her lap with her hands flat on it, the way one holds a bird that has gone still. Ron looked out of the window for a long time. Harry held the folded silk and the wooden frame and the letter inside his pocket, and he looked at the soft brass corners of the carriage's interior, and after a while he said, in a small voice that surprised him by being his own, "My mother knew. She knew about all of it, before she died. She knew I would be this. She made the silk. She wrote a letter that was meant to be read by a son she might not ever see." "Yes," said Hermione. "That's very," he said and stopped, because he did not have the word for it. He sat in the silence. The bird breathed against his neck. He understood, after a moment, that he had been wanting, for 10 years, to know whether his mother had ever once sat at a table and thought specifically about him. He had not known he had wanted it until the want was answered. The answer warmed him in a way the bird could not. "Yes," said Hermione again. She put her hand very carefully on his sleeve. She did not say anything else. The carriage moved. At dinner that night in the great hall, Harry was quiet. He sat between Hermione and Ron, and he ate the food the school had set out, and he answered the questions other Gryffindors put to him with brief, polite, truthful answers that did not, in any case, satisfy them. The bird on his shoulder did not move. Across the hall, Albus Dumbledore did not look at him. Across the hall, Albus Dumbledore looked at his plate, and at his colleagues, and at the windows, and not at him. In the high stone chamber called the Room of Requirement, which exists at the end of a corridor on the 7th floor, and which had not been opened in 2 years, the air did a small, dry, quiet thing, and on a small stack of books behind a small bust of an ugly warlock, a tiara of cracked, tarnished metal with a single dull, dark stone began, very slowly, to cool. The cooling continued for the rest of the night. By morning, the metal of the tiara had become brittle the way old paper is brittle, and the dark stone in its center had clouded white and then, slowly, to powder. By the morning after that, a careful hand could have crumbled the tiara without effort. By the morning after that, no hand would need to, because the tiara had crumbled on its own into a small gray heap that the room which is what one needs it to be, would, eventually, choose to sweep up. In a tower at the other end of the castle, Albus Dumbledore stood at his window with the spread fingers of his right hand on the stone sill, and he closed his eyes, very briefly, the way a man closes his eyes in the middle of a sentence to think about the next word, and he understood, in the quiet behind his eyelids, that 2 of his careful arrangements had stopped existing in the world. He did not know yet which 2. He did not yet have the names of them. He had, in the place where their names should be, 2 empty rooms in his mind, and the empty rooms had the small particular emptiness of rooms which have, very recently, been swept clean. He opened his eyes. He stood at the window for a long time. Beyond the window, the grounds were dark. A small red shape moved at the upper edge of his vision against a far tower, a single bird flying a slow, steady patrol along the parapet, and he watched the bird go, and he did not call to it, and the bird did not come. He closed the window. "All right," he said quietly to the empty office. "All right." In the Gryffindor dormitory, Harry took the portrait of his mother out of the crook of his arm and propped it on the small chest beside his bed and put the folded silk in the drawer of the chest. He did not yet hang the portrait or unfold the silk. He sat on the edge of the bed in the warm, small dark, and the bird settled on the headboard beside his pillow. He took the letter out of his pocket. He read it one more time, slowly, all the way through. He fell asleep with the letter in his hand. The bird, in the dark, hummed the four-note phrase Harry had heard at 3 in the morning 2 nights ago in the cupboard, and the 4 notes settled again into the place under his ribs where they belonged. He slept, this time, the slow, deep sleep of a boy whose mother had sat in a kitchen one Wednesday morning 12 years ago and thought, with great care, about who he was going to be. Chapter 4, Cascade. The morning after the bank, in a small alcove off the Gryffindor common room, Hermione Granger named her hypothesis to Harry and Ron over a thermos of tea that she had, with the patient politics of a girl who had read 3 books about negotiating with elves, persuaded the kitchens to fill for her. "It is called," she said, "the Phoenix line, or, in some older books, the Beechwood line, after one of its strongest carrying families. It is a maternally inherited magical trait of the kind the Ministry classifies under hereditary creature affinity, which is the category they use when they have not got the courage to call something what it is. It expresses unpredictably. In a strongly expressing inheritor like Harry, it produces an awakening event at biological maturity, usually around the 11th birthday. The awakening involves a thermal change in the body, a number of cosmetic alterations to hair and eye color, and a stabilization of magical core. The most reliable text I have found describes the awakening as a quiet rearrangement. I have decided I like the phrase. I have decided I will use it." She paused. "I have also decided to tell you what I have decided not to write down anywhere where another student could find it." "All right," said Harry. "The phoenix in your blood," she said, "is, in addition to all of the lovely things it is, a thing that strongly objects to a particular sort of magic. The thing it objects to it is necromancy. That is too strong a word. It is the magic of binding fragments of the soul into objects to forestall death. There is a name for that. The name has not been written down in any book in the school library, although I have looked. There is a book in the restricted section that I think contains the name. I have not yet decided how to read it." "What is the name?" said Ron, in the voice of a boy who suspects he will not be glad to hear it. "I will tell you when I am sure," said Hermione. "I do not want to say it without being sure. The wrong word, said out loud, is a kind of small lie. I would prefer to have only true words in my mouth in front of the 2 of you. I will tell you, Harry, in private, the moment I have the right word." She paused. "What I am willing to say in this hallway is this. The thing that came out of Harry's scar on his birthday was not a part of Harry. It had been put there. It had been put there a long time ago. There is reason to believe it was not the only thing of its kind that exists in the world. There is reason to believe that all of the things of its kind are connected to each other by a small, thin, invisible thread of magic, and that when one of them dies, the rest of them weaken, and when several of them die, the rest of them die also, and quickly." "What put it there?" said Ron. Hermione did not look at him. She looked at the wall above the chair where Harry was sitting. "The man who killed Harry's parents," she said. "Right," said Ron after a long pause. "Right, all right, I knew that." "I knew that without you telling me. I think I have known it since you sat down. I just wanted to hear someone say it out loud." The bird, on Harry's shoulder, closed both eyes. It opened them again. It did not look afraid. The bird was, Harry thought, incapable of being afraid, which struck him in that moment of a Tuesday morning as the most extraordinary qualification any companion could possess. "All right," he said. "All right," said Hermione, "is one way to say it. I would also accept yes, or understood, or let us proceed. I find that I prefer let us proceed." "Let us proceed," said Harry. "Thank you," said Hermione. In a stand of trees outside the village of Little Hangleton, in a small, low-roofed shack with 3 rooms and a smell of mold, the floorboards of the front room were beneath a level inch of dust, and the dust had not been disturbed by a foot or a hand or a wand for 10 years. Beneath the floorboards, in a small wooden box buried 6 inches deep, sat a ring of corroded gold with a black stone in its setting. The stone had a crack across its face. The crack had been there for as long as the ring had been there. The ring was the ring of Marvolo Gaunt, and inside it was a small, careful, hateful piece of something that had once been a soul. At 7 o'clock in the morning, while Hermione was pouring her thermos, the stone in the ring grew warm. It was the warmth of a candle held near a coin. Then it was the warmth of a candle held against a coin. Then the gold of the ring began to soften. The setting holding the stone bent very slightly outward, the way a hand opens. The stone clouded. Inside the cloud there was a small moving thing the size of a beetle, and the small moving thing did, at the moment the stone clouded, a quick frantic moth circle inside its glass, and then went still. The stone, having clouded, cracked through. The crack opened all the way across. The crack let out a thin, black, slim sigh of something, and the sigh hung in the air under the floorboards for 1 second and went away and did not come back. The ring sat in its box and was, then, only a ring of corroded gold with a black ash in its setting where a stone had been. In a wood-paneled drawing room above Grosvenor Square, in a townhouse so old that one of its bricks had been laid by a man who had spoken once to a Norman, a glass-fronted cabinet held a locket on a small velvet cushion. The locket was the locket of Salazar Slytherin, and the man who had hidden it there had been dead for half a year. Around 8 in the morning, the locket made a small clicking sound, the way a brittle thing makes when it is being asked to be a thing it is not. The clicking sound was followed by a sound the locket had no business making, which was the sound of a small dry leaf being slowly closed. The chain of the locket contracted, hair by hair, until the entire body of the locket was a small dark, crumpled stone the size of a hazelnut. The stone sat on the velvet cushion. The velvet did not, by morning, have a single mark on it. The locket was simply gone, in the way of a thing that has finished its business and has, with the courtesy of finishing it, removed itself. In a vault 300 feet below the floor of Diagon Alley, a small gold cup with 2 handles sat on a high stone shelf with 17 other small gold cups for company. The cup was the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, and it had not been used to drink from in 9 centuries. At 9:45 that morning, the gold of the cup made a small, high musical sound, such as a tuning fork makes when its arm is touched against a table edge. The note died. The note did not, however, leave the cup. The note went on humming inside the metal of the cup at a frequency below hearing, and the gold began, by the slow degrees of a thing being remembered to a different shape, to powder. The cup, by 10 o'clock, was a small pile of gold dust the consistency of fine flour. The pile sat on the stone shelf. The dust drifted, very slowly, at the edge of the shelf, in a draft that no one in the bank had ever measured. In a hollow under the roots of a fallen birch, in a forest in the highlands of Albania, a snake the length of a felled birch lay coiled in the cold, sleeping the slow sleep that snakes sleep. The snake's name was Nagini. The snake was older than any snake of her species had a right to be. Inside the snake there had been a small, careful sliver of someone else, and the sliver had been keeping her alive past her natural year for a long, long time. At a little after 11 in the morning, the sliver inside the snake gave out the way a candle wick gives out under water, not with a flare, but with a quiet little hiss of cessation. The snake, who had been kept alive by the candle, did not at once die. The snake stirred. The snake opened her amber eyes. The snake felt, for the first occasion in her long, unnatural life, what it was to be only a snake again, and the feeling was the cold of the hollow, and the cold was very deep, and the snake had no longer the borrowed warmth in her to fight it. She uncoiled very slowly. She lay her head on the moss. She did not sleep. She did not need to. She lay her head on the moss, and she closed her amber eyes, and after a while she was simply a long, quiet body in the cold, with no candle in her any longer. At Hogwarts, in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, Professor Quirrell was halfway through a lecture on the wards of medieval Carpathian villages when something in him stopped. Harry, who had been only half listening, looked up. Quirrell was at the front of the room. Quirrell had a piece of chalk in his right hand. Quirrell had been drawing a diagram on the blackboard. The chalk in Quirrell's right hand stopped moving. Quirrell's left hand went, slowly, to the back of his head, beneath the great purple turban. Quirrell's left hand sat there for a moment. Quirrell's left hand came down again. Quirrell looked at the blackboard. Quirrell looked at the chalk in his right hand. Quirrell put the chalk down on the small wooden tray under the board with the great careful precision of a man putting away a thing he was no longer entitled to be holding. "That will," he said, in a voice that did not stutter, "do for the day." You will read, please, the second chapter of Bagshot and write a paragraph on it for next week." Class dismissed. He left. He did not leave in the way a teacher leaves a classroom. He did not collect his notes. He did not extinguish the lamp on his desk. He took his cloak from the back of his chair and put it on and walked out of the door with the slow, careful steps of a man whose legs were not quite his own anymore. The students looked at one another. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry was looking at the door Quirrell had walked through. Harry's bird on Harry's shoulder had opened both eyes and was looking at the same door in the alert, intelligent way of a creature that had registered a thing leaving the room. "All right," said Harry quietly. "All right. Hermione, I think we should not follow him." "No," said Hermione. "I agree, we should not follow him." She paused. "He will not return." By that evening, Quirrell was on a train from Aberystwyth. By morning, he was on a boat. By noon the next day, he was in a small town in the south of France, where he sat in a cafe for 2 hours and drank a cup of black coffee and put his turban into a waste bin in the men's lavatory, and did not, for the rest of his natural life, set foot in Britain again. He was 41 years old. He would, in the end, become a competent and indifferent translator of medieval German pamphlets, and would marry a kind woman named Elodie, and would never tell her, in any of the 30 years they spent together, about the year a great cold thing had lived behind his eyes. In Albus Dumbledore's office on the same afternoon, 4 small empty rooms were now standing open in the back of Albus Dumbledore's mind. He had names for 2 of them by the evening, Diadem, Locket. He had a strong suspicion of the 3rd. He did not yet know what to call the 4th. He stood at the window of his office for 40 minutes after sunset, with his hands behind his back, and did not move. The portraits behind him watched. They watched in the long, patient, professional way that headmasters' portraits watch a sitting headmaster who has come to a difficult evening. Dylies Derwent, who had been headmistress in the 1740s, said quietly to Phineas Nigellus Black, in the small, distant voice the portraits used among themselves, "He is doing the thing where he is going to do something dramatic." "I should hope so," said Phineas. "It is very nearly time." Dumbledore did not turn around. He had heard them, of course, he always heard them. He preferred, on certain evenings, to let them think he had not. He went at last to his desk. He sat down. He took out a sheet of parchment. He wrote, in a hand kept steady by long practice, 3 short letters. The first was to Minerva, the second was to Severus, the third was to the Department of Mysteries. He folded each of them. He sealed each of them. He stood. He took the 3 letters down to the owlery himself, which was something he had not done in many years, and which several portraits remarked on after he had gone. He gave the letter for Minerva to a school owl. He gave the letter for Severus to a smaller school owl. He gave the letter for the Department of Mysteries to a long-feathered eagle owl named Esme, who had been at Hogwarts for 53 years and who took such messages without being told twice. He came back down to his office. He sat. He looked at the empty perch behind his desk. "Old friend," he said quietly, "I do not have the right to ask you back, do I?" The perch did not answer. The empty perches in his office never had. He took, after a while, his half-moon spectacles off and rubbed the bridge of his nose and put the spectacles back on. In the Gryffindor common room that night, around the fire, a single red feather came in through the chimney. It was a small feather, no longer than Harry's thumb. It was carried on a draught of warm air, and it spun, very slowly, down through the smoke and the warmth of the fire, and it came to rest on the open page of the book Hermione had been reading. Hermione, who had taken the feather seriously for some seconds before she lifted her head. "Harry," she said. The bird on Harry's shoulder had opened its eyes. Both of them, it was looking at the feather. It tilted its head exactly once in the manner of a creature observing a thing it had not done. "That is yours," Hermione said to the bird. "Is it not?" The bird did the very slow blink that, by now, Harry had learned was its way of saying yes. "There is something in the feather," said Hermione. That is," she picked the feather up. It was warm in her fingers. She turned it. She held it close to the firelight. She narrowed her eyes. "Harry, there are words on it." "Words?" "Written along the rachis, in a tiny, tiny hand." Hand it to me, would you? The boy on your shoulder is too discreet to read in front of you. She lowered the feather. Someone has sent you a letter on a feather. Someone has trusted a phoenix to take it. Someone knows you have a phoenix. Someone is willing to be funny about it. I have a small short list of suspects. She gave him the feather. He held it close to the fire. The words, when he found them, were tiny, in a black ink that had been laid on with the patience of a man drawing the rigging of a ship in a bottle. The hand was elegant and slightly slanted and very tired. Dear Harry, if you are reading this, my old friend has decided you are worth taking notes from. I am glad. He is harder to please than I am. I am Sirius Black. I am your godfather. I have been in a place I should not have been in for 10 years for a thing I did not do. I am not presently in that place. I am at the King's Head in Hogsmeade in a room above the kitchen where they do not look too closely at lodgers if you pay in advance. I am paying in advance. I would like very much to see you. I will not approach the school. I will wait. If you cannot or do not wish to come, please write back on the feather. It will find me. I love you and I am sorry I have not yet been any use to you. Harry read the message twice. He put the feather down on the open page of Hermione's book. He looked at the bird on his shoulder. You knew him, he said, the very slow blink. He's safe. The very slow blink. All right, said Harry in a small, calm voice that did not in any way reflect the state of the warm fire under his ribs. He looked at Ron, he looked at Hermione. I have a godfather. He is at the King's Head. He has been in a place he should not have been for 10 years. I would like to see him. I do not want to wait. Can we go? We can go, said Hermione. We will need a permission, but we will not get a permission. We will need to leave the castle, but we will not be allowed to leave the castle. We will need to be back before morning. We will need. She paused. I think I would like to ask Professor McGonagall to come with us. I think we should not lie about this. I think it will be a faster trip with her than without her. I think she will not say number, all right, said Harry. It was not Professor McGonagall who said yes, in the end, although she said yes also. It was Professor Snape. Hermione, in the staff corridor that night, had stopped at McGonagall's door and lifted her hand to knock and lowered her hand again, and stood there for a long moment, and turned, and walked past Snape's door and stopped, and turned again and went back and knocked at his. Snape opened the door. He looked at Hermione. He looked at Harry behind her. He looked at the bird on Harry's shoulder. Mr. Potter, he said. His voice was the voice he had used in the antechamber. It was a voice without much air. It is past curfew. Sir, said Harry, Sirius Black has written to me. The pause that followed was not the silence of a man arranging a thought. It was the silence of a man arranging several years. Snape said after a moment, Where is he? Hogsmeade, the King's Head. You wish to go to him? Yes, sir. Tonight. Yes, sir. You are aware, said Snape, that he has spent the last decade in Azkaban for a crime which the Ministry believes him to have committed. I am, sir, said Harry. The Ministry is wrong. My mother told me so. Snape looked at him for a long, considered second. Then Snape did, for the second time in 3 days, a thing he had not done in 20 years. He stepped aside from the door of his own office and said, in a voice that was very nearly an ordinary voice, Come in. Sit, please. Miss Granger, you may take notes. Mr. Potter, when did your mother tell you? I would like to know. In a letter, sir, in a vault. Yesterday. Ah, said Snape, with the small, dry, private flicker of a man who has been expecting an outcome for some years and has only just been notified of its arrival. Of course, the vault, I had wondered. He closed the door behind them. He went to his desk. He did not sit behind it. He stood at its corner, one hand on its edge, and he looked at Harry. Mr. Potter, he said, Sirius Black was, when I knew him, a man of great vanity, great courage, and a great talent for not thinking before he acted. He was also, in a fashion I never forgave him for, very fond of your father. He was, I have always believed, fond of your mother also, although he had the wisdom not to make trouble of it. I have not seen him in 11 years. I have had 10 years to revisit certain assumptions about him. The revisions are not yet finished, but the revisions are well underway. If your mother says he is innocent of what he was charged with, then he is innocent of what he was charged with. He paused. I will take you to him. Sir, said Hermione, who had not had her notes out and now opened her copybook in a hurry. I will take Mr. Potter to him, said Snape. Tonight, I will speak to Minerva on the way. We will not ask the headmaster. I know, Miss Granger, on reflection. I will ask the headmaster. The headmaster will say yes. We will be back before morning. Mr. Weasley, you will not be coming because your mother is, by my reckoning, 2 days from learning something that will make her uncertain whether she is glad of any of her son's choices of friends, and I will not give her further evidence on the matter. Yes, sir, said Ron, with mild despair. Miss Granger, you will come, because Mr. Potter is going to be more able to think clearly with you in the room than without you, and Mr. Potter will need to be able to think clearly. I am paying you a compliment, Miss Granger. Do not be surprised. Yes, sir. Mr. Potter. Yes, sir. The bird will come, of course. The bird does what it does. Yes, sir. Then we go. They went. Snape's cloak around the three of them was warm and dark and smelled faintly of old herbs. The path from Hogwarts to Hogsmeade was not the path that ran from the gates. Snape took them by a smaller path under the wall, through a kind of low tunnel-like fold in the boundary, which Hermione, walking through it, looked at and made a small approving sound at, and which Harry, walking through it, did not have time to think about. The bird flew low above them, in long loops between trees. By the time they reached the village, it was after midnight, and the village was the kind of a sleep that small villages are at midnight on a Tuesday in autumn. The King's Head sat at the end of the high street, low and broad and unlit. The kitchen window at the back, however, glowed with the faint orange of a lamp. Snape went around to the back. Snape knocked, in a particular sequence of 3 and 2, on the kitchen door. The kitchen door opened. The man behind it was thin to the point of looking unwell. He had been beautiful once. He was still beautiful in the way that people remained beautiful after illness, with a translucent quality and a sharpness about the cheekbones. His hair was long and gray-black and tied back with a piece of leather. His eyes were not the eyes Harry had been picturing on the way down. They were better eyes than Harry had let himself picture. They were the eyes of a man who had been kept, for 10 years, from looking at anyone he loved, and who had come out of that place not crushed by it but somehow refined. "Snape," said the man. "Black." The two men looked at each other for a long, uncomfortable beat. Sirius Black recovered first. He looked past Snape. His eyes found Harry. His face, the face that had been arranged by long practice for whatever expression he had been planning to use first, did not get to be the face he had planned. It went, instead, very quiet, the way the surface of a pond goes quiet at the end of a wind. "Oh," said Sirius Black very softly. "Oh, look at you?" He did not at once kneel. He did not at once cross the threshold. He stood in the kitchen doorway, with the lamp behind him, and looked. He looked at the amber-streaked hair. He looked at the warm green eyes. He looked at the silver line on the forehead. He looked at the bird on Harry's shoulder, which was the bird he had last seen on Albus Dumbledore's shoulder 15 years ago, and his face did, very briefly, the small wry tip at the corner of his mouth that Harry recognized at once from the painted face on his bedside chest. "My God," he said. "He came to you. I had hoped he might, but I had not. God, look at you. Come in, all of you come in. Sit. There is tea, although the tea is awful, because this is the King's Head, where they boil the tea and apologize about it." He stepped aside. "Snape, I never thought I would say this, thank you." "Do not say it twice," said Snape, walking past him. "I will pretend you have not said it the once." Harry came through the doorway. His godfather was on one knee before Harry had reached the table, in a motion which had taken less time than Harry had thought a grown man's body could take. Sirius did not put his arms around him. Sirius held out one hand, palm up, in the small, careful manner of a person showing a frightened cat that he was empty-handed. Harry, after a moment, put his hand in his godfather's hand. "Hello, kid," said Sirius. "Hello," said Harry. "You are exactly the right height. You are exactly the right weight. You are warm, which I had been warned about. Your bird is, as it happens, my old friend, who I have not seen in 15 years and who has not, I notice, condescended to look at me." He glanced at the bird. "Hello, you." The bird, who had been pointedly not looking at Sirius, slowly and reluctantly tilted its head 1 degree in his direction. Sirius's face produced a small laugh that turned, Almost at once, into something that was not a laugh, he covered it with the hand that was not holding Harry's. He held the cover up for a few seconds. He took it down again. His face was the face that was going to be his face for the rest of the night, and which was the face of a man who had not in 11 years had any particular reason to take very good care of his composure. "Right," he said. "Right, sit, all of you. Harry, sit beside me. I am not going to overdo this. I am only going to look at you a great deal. Hermione, is it, Hermione? Sit. Snape, sit, don't loom. You look so well, Snape. You have not changed. Sit." They sat. There was tea. The tea was awful. Sirius had on the table a stack of small notebooks. He had been writing in them, by the look of it, for several days. He had a wand on the table, which was new and inexpensive and had a small chip at the tip. He had a thin piece of bread and a small piece of cheese on a saucer beside the notebooks, which was, by all signs, his dinner. "All right," said Sirius. He took, with great care, the hand he had been holding in both of his hands and held it more firmly. He looked Harry in the face. "Harry, I am going to do this in order. I am going to make sense. Stop me if I am not making sense. I have not been required to make sense for 10 years. I have got out of the practice." "All right," said Harry. "I was sent to Azkaban," said Sirius, "for a crime I did not commit. The crime was committed by a small fat man called Peter Pettigrew, who was, until that night, your father's friend and mine. He was the man who told a certain other person where you and your parents had hidden. I was, until that morning, the person who had been supposed to be told. We swapped. We swapped at the last minute. We swapped because I thought a switch would protect you, because it would put the lie in a place no one would look. I was wrong about him. I had thought he was a coward. I had not thought he was a traitor. I was wrong. He was the second of those, and the first one too. I have spent 10 years thinking about that wrongness." He paused. "I have not yet found a way to be sorrier for it than I am. I am sorry. I am very, very sorry." "All right," said Harry. "That isn't a thing you can answer to," said Sirius. "I know that. I am not asking you to answer to it. I am only saying it because I need you to hear it from me before I say any other thing. Have you heard it?" "Yes," said Harry. "Good." Sirius drew breath. "I escaped Azkaban 2 weeks ago. I am not the first to do so. I am the first to do so without dying within the hour. The bird helped me with the last part. He did not break me out. He carried a letter from me, much like the one tonight, to a man whose name I am not going to give in this room because Snape is here. The man came in his own time, by his own means, and got me as far as the coast. I have been on the road since. I have not slept very much. I have been writing, in those notebooks, the story of what happened the night your mother and father died, because if I am to die before I finish this errand, I would like there to be a record. I would like to give the notebooks to you. I would like you to read them when you are older, if I do not get to tell you about them in person. You are not going to die before you finish this errand," said Hermione, in the small, certain tone of a girl who had taken on a project and meant to see it through. Sirius looked at her. He did not smile, exactly. The small wry tip at the corner of his mouth lifted 1/4 of an inch. "I am beginning to like this one," he said to Harry. "Yes," said Harry. "Good." Sirius looked back at Harry. "I am going to ask one thing, and then I am going to stop talking and look at you for a while. The thing is this. Do you want me? Do you want me as a part of your life? I will be a part of your life if you want me. I will not be a part of your life if you do not. There is no obligation. I made a promise to your mother before she died. I cannot make her glad of me. I can make sure her son does not have to live another year without the part of his family that knows how to be glad of him. If you do not want it. If you do not want it, I will go away. I will write to you on holidays. I will be available. I will not be a presence. Tell me what you want." Harry thought about this for a long second. He looked at the bird on his shoulder. He looked at Hermione. He looked at Sirius's hand around his. "I would like you," he said. Sirius's face, the second time, did not become a laugh. It became, very quietly, what the face of a tired man becomes when he is told a thing he has not been told in a very long time. He closed his eyes. The hand around Harry's tightened 1/4 degree. He did not say thank you, because the size of the thing did not fit in the words. He nodded once, and that was the entire answer. "Right," he said after a moment, opening his eyes. Right, plans, Snape, I am going to need things. I am going to need a fresh wand. I am going to need a man at the ministry who can be. I am going to need. You will need rest, said Snape. First, the rest, then the wand. I have already had 3 hours of rest tonight. You will need more than 3 hours. It is fine. It is not. Snape, black, said Snape. I have not forgotten the night your stupid arrogance nearly killed me in a tunnel. I have not forgiven you for it. I am not going to forgive you for it. I am, however, going to keep you alive long enough to do this child the small basic decency of being his godfather, and you cannot do that if you fall over on a Tuesday because you did not sleep in 1984. Eat the cheese. Drink the tea. Lie down. You are a remarkable man, Snape. I am a tired man. Eat the cheese. Sirius ate the cheese. He ate it the way a man eats when he has been remembering how to eat regularly. The kitchen was quiet for a while. The lamp burned. The bird on Harry's shoulder breathed the slow phoenix breath. Harry held his godfather's hand and watched him chew, and thought, in a small private place at the back of his mind, where the warm thing under his ribs lived, that he could afford to wait out a great many other emergencies tonight. He could afford to wait out all of them. The waiting could happen later. They went back to the castle at 4. Snape had insisted, by then, that Sirius lie down on the small wooden bench by the kitchen fire. With a blanket, Snape had himself fetched from upstairs in a movement that was startling for its ordinariness. And Sirius had argued, briefly, and given in. He had taken Harry's hand again before they had gone. He had said with the small wry tip, "Tomorrow, kid, tomorrow, I am here. The bird knows where I am. We will work the rest of it out." Harry had said, "Tomorrow," and had stood in the doorway looking at his godfather lying on the bench by the fire for one long moment, and the bird had perched on the back of the bench beside Sirius and tucked its head against Sirius's shoulder in a small offering of warmth, which Sirius had accepted, with eyes that were not quite closed and not quite open. In the small, low-folded path under the wall, going back to the castle, Hermione walked beside Harry and did not say anything. Snape walked ahead of them with the cloak around his shoulders, billowing in a wind that was not, exactly, a wind. Above them the bird flew its long loops between trees. Harry walked with his hand in his pocket on the folded letter he had not let out of his pocket since the day before. In Albus Dumbledore's office, at 4:45, the headmaster sat at his desk with the 4 small empty rooms standing open in the back of his mind. The names had come. He had 3 of them: diary, diadem, locket. He suspected a 4th. He could not name a 4th yet. He would, by morning, suspect a 5th. By the next evening he would, in the back of his mind, count 6, and the 6 would have a small particular shape between them that he had been arranging in his mind for many years, and that he was now watching come apart with the calm of a master clockmaker watching a clock he had built in his youth begin to chime backward. He sat at his desk. He picked up a quill. He set it down again. He looked at the empty perch. "Old friend," he said quietly, "I am about to have made a great many mistakes. I would like the record to show that I have begun to know it." The perch did not answer. The office was very still. In the Gryffindor dormitory, Harry, with the portrait of his mother on the chest beside his pillow, put the letter inside the inner pocket of his pajama top, and the bird settled on the headboard above his head, and Harry slept. The bird, in the dark, hummed the 4-note phrase, low under its breath, and the 4 notes settled into the place under his ribs where they were now living, and the small, slow heartbeat at the bird's breast and the slow, steady heartbeat in Harry's chest, beat for beat, ran together. Outside the castle, in fields, in stone shacks, in vaults, in hollows, in cabinets in great houses, a number of small, careful, hateful things had, in the course of one day, finished being. Their absence in the world was not a noise. It was, more, the quality of a room that has, recently, been swept clean. Chapter 5, The Lectern in a Small Valley in the High Country of Albania, on a damp morning of low light and lower cloud. The thing that had once been a man and was, by that morning, a wisp of something even less than a man, found that there was nowhere left to go. It had taken Peter Pettigrew, who had served the thing for 11 years and 4 months with a fidelity that did not quite cross over into affection, a long, quiet hour to admit that the snake was dead. He had found her in the hollow under the birch. He had stood for the long, quiet hour beside the body without speaking, with his small white hands held in front of him, and he had thought, in the small, fast way that small, fast minds think, through the implications. The snake was the vessel through which his master's spectral form was sometimes received into a body. The snake had been kept alive past her natural year by a small piece of his master's careful design. The snake's death was not an ordinary death. The snake's death meant the careful piece of design was no longer. He had not, in the first part of the hour, wept. He had not, in the second part of the hour, prayed. He had spent the third part of the hour rummaging in his pockets for a small bone-handled knife he was meant to have on him at all times, and which he had, in his fluster, mislaid. He had spent the fourth part of the hour finding it. Then he had heard the voice. The voice came from the cold air above his shoulder. The voice did not, that morning, have its usual sibilant register. It had been reduced, by what had happened in the night, to a thin, reaching rasp. Wormtail. Yes, master. The snake. Yes, master. Is dead. Yes, master. Wormtail. Yes, master. My ring. Master. My ring, said the voice, quieter still. My ring is also gone. Peter Pettigrew did not, for several seconds, know what to do with this. The ring was not a thing he had ever been told about in plain terms. He had only known it as a thing the master had been very particular about, in a way that suggested it was the sort of thing one did not forget had been particular. He stood, he swallowed. He said, I am sorry, master. Sorry, said the voice. Sorry, the locket is also. Master, the cup. Master, I do not understand. The diadem. What is happening, master? The diary, hissed the voice, in a low, rough sibilant that was the closest it had come, in many months, to its old register, was burned on the morning of the 31st of July of this year by a child. The child was not a Horcrux. The child was the carrier of a Horcrux, and the Horcrux is dead. 6 of the 7 are gone. 6 of my pieces. 6. Master, Peter said, who did not know the word Horcrux and was, in some part of his mind, already deciding never to know it on purpose. What do you require of me? What can I do? You can, said the voice, very slowly, do the only thing you have ever been any good at. You can betray someone. You will betray, this time, on my behalf. You will conduct the ritual, the forms still hold. The ritual will pull me into a body. The body will not last, Wormtail. There is nothing now to anchor it. I will go in and I will come out the other side, and I will have a small number of days. Possibly hours. We will use them. Master, what shall we use them for? To go, said the voice, to the place where the child is. It had been raining. The valley smelled of wet bracken. Peter Pettigrew, after a long moment in which several quiet, sensible parts of him went into a cupboard and shut the door, said, Yes, master. He performed the ritual that night. He performed it in a small clearing at the foot of the valley, on ground he had cleared with the side of his foot. He used bone, taken from a small village graveyard at midnight. He used flesh, taken from his own left hand at the wrist. He used blood, taken from a Muggle traveler whose name Peter Pettigrew would not, for the rest of his short life, allow himself to remember. He spoke the words. The words had not been said aloud in 50 years. The words held. The cauldron boiled, the cauldron seethed, a body rose out of the cauldron. It was the body Peter had been told to expect. It was tall and white and thin to the bone. It had a face the shape of a skull. It had eyes the color of cooked egg white with red at the slit pupils. It had long white spider fingers. It stood up out of the cauldron with the slow, careful motion of a man trying out a new pair of legs. It looked at its hands. It flexed its fingers, one at a time, beginning with the thumb of its right hand, in the calm, meditative way of a watchmaker considering a piece of work for which he had high hopes. Master, whispered Peter. The thing in the cauldron looked at him. Get me my wand. Peter got the wand. The thing, Voldemort, who had a name and would be entitled to it for the time he had remaining, took the wand. He held it. He felt for the connection that should have been there. He felt the connection. He felt also the small subtraction beneath the connection, the small subtraction beneath that one, the small subtraction beneath that one. He counted. He counted and counted and counted because mathematics had been a comfort to him as a small boy and had remained one. He counted 6 subtractions. He stopped counting. Wormtail, said Voldemort. Master? My robe. Peter brought the robe. Voldemort put it on. He stepped out of the cauldron. He stood in the clearing, in the rain, in the small radius of failing fire that the cauldron threw up at his ankles. He looked at the rain. He held out a hand. The rain landed on the long pale hand and did not slide off in the ordinary way. It sizzled on the skin in small white plumes, in the manner of water hitting a stove. Voldemort looked at the hand for a long moment. "Ah," he said quietly. Then more quietly, "Yes, as I thought, we will not have long." "Master," quiet Wormtail, "I am thinking. There is a thing I have been told, by a portrait I have not consulted in some years, about birds of a certain kind." I had not, at the time, considered the thing very seriously. I am considering it now. I would like, in the next 48 hours, to be at Hogwarts. Master, your body is not. I am aware of the state of my body, Wormtail. I will be aware of it for the duration of its functioning. The functioning will not be long. The functioning, however, will be long enough. I will require you to apparate me to a place near the school. I will then walk in by the front door. I have not used a front door of any building in 11 years. I would like the experience again. They will kill you, Master." Voldemort smiled. The smile was a thing his face did not have very much practice with. It was not, in any usual sense, a pleasant smile, but it was an honest one. "Yes, Wormtail," he said. "They will. I am, however, going to be the one who decides whom I am killing on the way." 3 days later, at 6 o'clock in the evening, the candles in the Great Hall of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry were being lit, one row at a time, by the schoolhouse elves in their usual long evening procession. The hall smelled of bread and onion and the autumn ash of a fire in the great fireplace at the south wall. Outside the high windows, the sky was the color of a plum that had been left out for 2 days. Inside the high windows, the great enchanted ceiling, which was always the color of the actual sky, was the same color the plum had been. Harry Potter sat at the Gryffindor table beside Hermione Granger, who was reading a small book and eating a roll at the same time, an operation she had perfected. Ron Weasley sat across from them, eating, on principle, everything in his reach. The bird on Harry's shoulder was awake. It had been awake all afternoon. It had not, for the entire afternoon, moved its head out of the angle in which the head was tilted slightly forward, and the eyes were open in the small, alert focus of a creature watching. In the air it could feel against its feathers a small particular wind. Harry, who had learned a great deal from the bird in the previous several weeks, was paying attention to the bird. "Hermione," he said, she looked up. "Something is going to happen tonight." "Yes," said Hermione, who had been watching the bird also in her peripheral vision for the last hour. "I am of the same impression. Do we know what number should we get up? Should we go somewhere?" "No," said Harry. He did not know how he knew. He knew. "I think we should stay where we are. I think the thing is coming here, and I think the thing is coming for me. I think it is better, on balance, that I be where I am visible than somewhere I am not." He paused. "I am sorry. I do not have a better plan." "That is a fine plan," said Hermione, who put her book down and folded her napkin and turned in her seat so that she could see the front doors of the hall over the long roll of Ravenclaws to her right. "I will sit so that I can see the door. I am not, Harry. I am not afraid. I notice. I am not afraid. I want to write that down for later. I expected to be afraid." "I am not either," said Harry. "That is the bird," said Hermione thoughtfully. I think the bird is bringing it with him. I think it is being lent to us. I do not think this is going to be a feeling I have when there is no bird." "That seems right." "All right," said Hermione. "Let us proceed." Ron, on the other side of the table, who had been listening with the small, dry attention of a boy who had grown up with 7 family members and had learned, accordingly, to listen to several conversations at once, said, Should I send word to a professor?" "Yes," said Harry. "Please," quietly. "Tell Professor McGonagall there is going to be something. Tonight, now, at the door. Tell her I am sorry that I do not know more. Tell her I am where I am." "Right," said Ron, and rose, and went, in the easy, unhurried tall walk of a tall boy crossing a hall full of moving children to talk to the deputy headmistress about a thing he could not name. Harry watched him go. He looked at the high table. Snape, who had been eating his usual small, careful meal, had stopped eating. Snape was looking at the doors. McGonagall, after Ron reached her, looked also at the doors. Dumbledore, in the center seat, the seat he had occupied for 40 years, looked at his plate. He had not looked at the doors. He had not, in fact, looked at anything but his plate for some minutes. He was very still. The doors opened. They did not open the way the doors of the Great Hall of Hogwarts ordinarily opened. The doors of the Great Hall did not, ordinarily, do anything at all under their own power. They sat as doors. People moved them. The people who moved them tonight were not people. The doors swung inward, in a long, slow, careful arc, the way they would have swung if a great wind had come into the corridor outside, and there was no wind in the corridor outside, and the doors went on swinging. In the doorway stood a tall, thin, pale figure in a long black robe. The figure was alone. There was no Pettigrew at the figure's shoulder. Pettigrew, Harry would learn later, was apparating himself, even then, into the woods 3 miles to the west, with the small, careful instinct of a small, careful man who had used up the small, careful piece of fidelity he had been carrying and had nothing left to carry. The figure took one slow step into the hall. The figure took another. The figure walked, with the calm, careful gait of a man on a high wire, down the center aisle between the long tables. The hall, which had been a hum of 300 children, went silent in a small, fast wave from the back to the front. The candles guttered. The figure walked. It was not, at this stage, a face many of the children in the hall had seen before. It was a face most of the teachers had not seen in this exact shape. It was the face the children had been told about, however. It was the face of the stories that had been told to them by older brothers and parents and aunts and board defense against the dark arts substitutes, for as long as they had been able to listen to stories. It was the long, thin, chinless face with the slit nostrils where the nose should be. It was the wet, egg-white eyes. It was the mouth like a horizontal cut. It walked into the Great Hall of Hogwarts on a Tuesday evening in October, and the hall, having been told it would happen one day, found that it had not, in the event, been ready. Voldemort walked the length of the hall. He did not look at the children. He did not look at the teachers. He did not look at Albus Dumbledore, who had not, since the moment the doors began to open, lifted his eyes from his plate. He looked only at Harry Potter, who was sitting 2/3 of the way down the Gryffindor table beside a small curly-haired girl with a roll in her hand and a bird on his shoulder. He smiled again. It was an honest smile. The face had not had practice. The smile reached only one side of his mouth. "Hello," said Voldemort, in a voice that was thin in the air but which carried, by some old courtesy of his magic, into every corner of the hall. "Hello, my child." Harry stood up. He did not stand up because he had decided to stand up. He stood up the way one stands up at the entrance of an elder relative whom one has been asked, by a parent, to greet politely. The bird on his shoulder did not move. The fire in his chest, which had been quiet, opened one eye and considered the figure walking up the aisle in the calm, appraising manner of a sleeping dog considering a thing that had come up the path. "You are not my child," said Harry, before he had thought of what to say. The hall heard him. "No," said Voldemort. "Number you are not. You are someone else's. And the someone else and her boy were the two great inconveniences of my middle life. I had not realized at the time how very inconvenient you would become. I should have. I have had time in the last several months to think about it. I did not give myself enough credit. I did not give your mother enough credit. I gave your mother quite a great deal of credit, and even what I gave her was not enough. Live and learn. Live and learn." He was, by then, at the front of the hall. He climbed the 3 small steps up to the platform on which the head table stood. He did not look at the head table. He turned on the platform and walked along it, behind the chairs of the teachers, who, one by one, drew their wands and held them with the careful, neutral readiness of professionals. He did not look at the wands. He did not look at the teachers. He passed Dumbledore's chair. Dumbledore, in the chair, did not raise his head. Dumbledore's hands on either side of the plate were folded, and the folding was the folding of a man waiting for a thing he has, in his long life, set in motion, and which he no longer has the right to interrupt. Voldemort reached the small wooden lectern at the far end of the head table. It was the lectern at which the headmaster sometimes stood when he addressed the school for occasions slightly more formal than dinner. It had a candle on it. The candle was lit. Voldemort climbed the small step behind the lectern. He set his hands on the lectern, one to either side of the candle. He turned his face out to the hall. He looked at Harry. "Child," he said, "come up here." "No," said Harry. The single word in the hall went into the corners and stayed there. "You will," said Voldemort, "come up here." "Number, you will." "I will not." Voldemort did then a small experiment which the hall did not at first understand. He raised his wand. He pointed it casually at a fourth-year Hufflepuff girl in the second-to-back row, who was sitting with her hands flat on the bench beside her in the calm, careful manner of a girl who had decided that all of her motion would, for the moment, take place inside her own skin. Voldemort opened his mouth to say a word that began with a hard A and ended in 2 long syllables. The wand did not finish the word. The wand caught fire. It did not, like Harry's wand in Ollivander's shop, throw out a slow, long envelope of red gold light. It caught fire the way a wet branch catches fire after one has been burning the dry branches around it for a long time. At first reluctantly, in small white surface flickers, and then, having decided, all at once. The wand burned along its length in a careful, clean orange that did not smoke. The fire ran up the wand into Voldemort's hand. The hand did not react. The fire ran up the arm into the sleeve of Voldemort's robe. The robe did not react. The fire ran up the sleeve into the shoulder, and then along the line of the collar, and then up the neck, and the neck did not react, although the face, looking out at Harry, became slowly aware of the fire and did, by small private degrees, begin to react to it. The face did not in the beginning become afraid. It became in the beginning surprised, and then, by quick stages, interested. Voldemort had been a curious child once. Voldemort had not, in many decades, had occasion to remember it. Voldemort was, in the burning, remembering it now, by accident. The fire ran along the collar of his robe, and up the chin and into the lower lip, and up to the slit nostrils where the nose should be. The fire was, by then, not running on the outside of him only. The fire was, by then, also running inside him. The fire was inside his veins. It was inside his ribs. It was inside the small, careful arrangement of his magic, which had been built, over the course of a lifetime, into a shape which had assumed it would never have to live without 6 small, careful anchors in 6 small, careful places in the British Isles. The anchors were gone. The shape had no idea what to do without them. The shape had been holding, for several days, only because Voldemort had been holding it together by an act of will that was very nearly the entire content of his consciousness. Voldemort, who had been holding it together, was now also being asked to hold himself together against a fire he had not budgeted for. He looked at Harry. He looked at Harry the way a chess player looks at the opponent who has played, very politely, a move he had not foreseen, and which, on inspection, is the move that wins. "Ah," said Voldemort, "I see." The fire reached his eyes. The eyes, which had been the color of cooked egg white with red slits, became, for one brief astonishing moment, the eyes of a clean young man who had once been called Tom. The eyes looked out at the hall, at the small face 2/3 of the way down the Gryffindor table, with the entire honest, interested attention of a child who has just been shown a magic trick by his elder. "Mother," said the mouth, in a voice that was not the voice of the thing that had spoken before. "Mother." "I mother the boy." The fire took the mouth. Voldemort, on the lectern in the Great Hall of Hogwarts, burned cleanly. He burned at the temperature of a phoenix flame, which is the temperature at which old reluctant things can burn out without any of them catching a light in turn. The candle on the lectern did not catch. The lectern did not catch. The cloth of the tablecloth on the head table did not catch. The hair of Albus Dumbledore at his place at the head table did not catch, although it was 3 feet from the burning, and although a small spider that had been walking on Dumbledore's shoulder did, very slightly, change its mind about the direction it had been walking in. The burning was an entirely contained burning. It existed within the radius of the thing being burned. It did not reach beyond. The robe burned. The skin of the long, pale hands burned. The bones of the long, white fingers beneath the hands burned. The long, thin skull burned. The slit nostrils burned. The wet egg-white eyes, the eyes that had for a moment been Tom's, were the last thing to burn. They burned with a small, high, steady flame at the orbits, the way a candle burns at the lip of a snuffer just before the snuffer comes down. The burning lasted in the hall the length of 1.5 minutes. It did not seem so. It seemed shorter, it seemed longer, it seemed both at once. The way certain things seem both at once when one is watching them carefully and at a distance. When it was done, there was nothing on the lectern. The candle still burned. The wax of the candle was a little softer at the rim where the wand fire had passed close to it. A small light ash, finer than flour, lay over the lectern. The ash drifted, in the small draft the hall always had, off the side of the lectern and into the air and across the head table in a long, slow drift. Some of the ash landed on the empty plate in front of Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore did not move. The hall, which had been holding a great quantity of itself in its lungs, breathed out. Harry Potter, who had been on his feet beside the Gryffindor table, sat down again, very slowly, like a boy who has been informed that he may now sit. By some authority he is not at first sure he is going to obey. The bird on his shoulder, which had not in the course of the burning moved, lowered its head against the side of his neck. The fire under his ribs gave a very small content low sigh and went back to sleep. The candles in the hall, which had guttered, steadied. The candles burned at their ordinary brightness. Hermione Granger, beside Harry, did not say anything. She had taken his hand at some point during the burning. He had not noticed her doing it. He noticed it now. He did not let go of it. After a moment she said, in a voice that was small and steady, "All right, all right, all right." "All right," said Harry. "All right," said Ron, who had come back to the table some time during the walk down the aisle, and who had not since moved. "All right." At the head table, Albus Dumbledore raised his head from his plate. He looked at the lectern. He looked at the ash that had drifted onto his plate. He looked then, for the first occasion in some hours, at Harry Potter, 2/3 of the way down the Gryffindor table, with the bird on his shoulder. The headmaster's face did several quiet things in quick succession. None of them, in the end, was the face of a man who had won a long game. It was the face of a man who had been spared, by some kindness he did not feel he had earned, the burden of finishing one. The face composed itself. The face stood up. The face placed both hands on the table in front of it, and the man behind the face used the hands to push himself, with the slow, careful unhurriedness of a great age, to his feet. "Children," said the headmaster. The hall, which had not been speaking, somehow became, on his word, even more attentive. "You have," he said, "this evening witnessed an end. It is the end of a man who once, before he was a man, was a boy in this school. He sat in your seats. He ate at your tables. He read your books. He decided, at a certain point in his life, that he did not wish to die. He took a number of decisions in pursuit of that wish which a wiser boy, or a boy with kinder companions, would not have taken. The decisions he took did not, in the end, prevent him from dying. They only delayed the dying, at the cost of a great many lives, including most of the lives in his own family, several of the lives of his own former classmates, and the lives of the parents of one of the children sitting in this hall." He paused. He did not look at Harry. He looked at his own hands on the table. "I have," he said, "made a great many mistakes in the last 50 years. Some of them are mistakes I will be able to put right. Others are mistakes that the next several years will require me to acknowledge in greater detail than I have yet acknowledged them. The mistake I will name tonight is one mistake among them. It is the mistake of having spent the last decade attempting to arrange, with great care, an outcome which would not have required any such arranging if I had only thought to ask, of the people in this room, what they themselves were capable of." He paused. He looked then at Harry. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice was old and warm and tired in a way that was not the warm, grandfatherly tired the hall had seen before. It was a different kind of tired. "Mr. Potter, I owe you an apology. I do not propose to give it tonight. The apology you are owed is a long one. It is the kind of apology that should be given in a room with chairs and tea, in private, and over several hours, and not from a lectern, and not over the noise of a hall full of children, most of whom are, this evening, going to remember every word I say. I would like to apologize to you in the coming days properly. Will you allow me to?" "Yes, sir," said Harry, who did not know what else to say. "Thank you," said Dumbledore. "Thank you, I will arrange a time. Please go on eating, all of you. I am sorry your dinner has been spoiled. There will be a pudding tonight, I am told. I would suggest you do not let the pudding go unattended on account of." He gestured with one hand at the lectern in a small, careful, inclusive gesture. "On account of." He sat down. The hall, which did not that evening eat very much pudding, ate, nonetheless, a small amount. Hermione, after a moment, lifted Harry's hand to the table and laid it down on the wood and took her hand back and picked up her napkin and put it in her lap. Ron, after a moment, drew his roll toward him and split it open and put butter on it. Harry, after a moment, did not eat anything. He sat at the table and looked at the small drift of pale ash that had landed on Dumbledore's plate. He thought, in a small far place at the back of his mind, of his Aunt Petunia at the kitchen door. With her hand lifted to her shoulder in the small motion that had been almost a wave, he thought of his mother in a kitchen in Godric's Hollow, in the morning before she had decided what to make for their lunch. He thought of his godfather on a kitchen bench at the King's Head with a blanket Snape had fetched him, lying with his eyes not quite closed and not quite open. The fire under his ribs slept and was warm and did not stir. The bird on his shoulder breathed against his neck. At the high table, Albus Dumbledore did not, for the remainder of the meal, eat anything. He sat at his place, with his hands folded in his lap, and looked at his plate and the small drift of ash on his plate and did not move. When the children had gone, an hour later, in long quiet streams through the doors of the hall, 2 by 2, 3 by 3, in the slow, careful way of a school recovering from a thing it would, for the rest of its careful, careful life, remember, the headmaster stood. He went to the lectern. He did not climb the step behind it. He stood in front of it and looked at the small dust of ash that lay on its surface, and after a long moment he placed the tips of 2 fingers on the surface and lifted them and looked at the small amount of ash that had come up on his fingertips. He brought the fingertips to his mouth. He did not eat the ash. He set the fingertips against his lower lip, the way a tired man brushes a finger against his lip in thought, and held them there for several seconds and lowered the hand again. "Tom," he said quietly, "I am sorry, Tom, I am sorry." He stood there a long time. In the corridor outside the hall, Harry Potter walked with Hermione on one side and Ron on the other, and the bird on his shoulder. He did not speak. They did not speak either. They walked together up the small, slow flights of stairs to the 7th floor, which had become, over the last several weeks, a kind of small walking habit between the 3 of them, and they came at last to the portrait of the fat lady, who looked at them with the careful attention of a portrait which had been hearing things in the corridors and which was making, for the moment, an effort to be politely unobtrusive about it. "Password," she said. "Wattlebird," said Hermione. The portrait swung open. In the common room, which was warm and low-lit and full of older Gryffindors looking at one another in the small, frightened, resolved way of teenagers who had had a great deal of news arrive in the space of one dinner, and who were trying, with their faces, to be ready for it, Harry walked the length of the room toward the stairs. Conversations, as he passed, did not stop. They thinned. They quieted. A small space opened around him. He did not look at it. He went up the stairs to the dormitory. In the dormitory, he sat on his bed. He took, after a moment, the portrait of his mother off the chest beside the bed and propped it on his knee. The painted lily had been resting, with her eyes closed and the corner of her mouth in its small wry tip. The painted lily opened her eyes. "Hello, love," she said. "Hello, Mum. You all right?" "I think so." "Yes," she said. The painted lily looked at him in the small, careful way the painter had given her. "I think you are. Come and tell me when you've thought about it." "I will." "Good lad." She closed her eyes. He sat on the bed with the portrait on his knee for a long time. The bird, on his shoulder, breathed against his neck. He understood that something had ended. He understood that an ending had been done, very neatly, in the hall, by a flame that he had inherited from a great-great-great-great-great-grandmother who had been an apothecary in Lambeth in 1712, and by a bird, and by a mother who had sat in a kitchen one Wednesday morning 12 years ago and thought, with great care, about who he was going to be. He understood that the ending had not required anything of him in particular, and that this was, he thought, the most remarkable thing about it. He had not been asked to do anything. He had only had to sit at a table beside a girl with a roll in her hand, and stand up when the time had come to stand up, and say no when the time had come to say no, and the flame had done the rest, because the flame had been waiting for 30 centuries to do what it had done in a minute and a half of one Tuesday evening. He lay down with the portrait beside his pillow. The painted lily, who had not entirely closed her eyes, watched him do this with a small, wry-approving tip at the corner of her painted mouth. The bird settled on the headboard. Outside the leaded window, in the dark, the last of the small light ash that had drifted out of the open doors of the great hall settled on the lawn, between two flagstones, in a quantity so small that the first rain, which came an hour before dawn, washed it cleanly into the soil. In the headmaster's office at midnight, Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk with his fingers folded against his lips, and did not move, and did not weep, and did not write any letters, and did not speak even to the portraits, who had, for once, the wisdom not to speak to him. He sat for the rest of the night. The empty perch behind him was, in some unmeasurable way, the loudest thing in the room. Somewhere in a forest in Albania, a small fat man with a silver hand sat on a fallen log and looked at the silver hand, and did not, for a long time, decide what he was going to do next. He decided eventually. He decided to walk to the nearest village. He decided to walk, after that, to the nearest town. He decided to take a train, after that, to somewhere there were no forests, where small fat men in coats too large for them would not be looked at twice. He decided this slowly, in pieces. He took, in the end, a long time to put the pieces together. He did, however, in the end, put them together. He stood up. He started to walk. The forest behind him did not, that night, miss him in any noticeable way. Chapter 6, Phoenix Lord. The first snow of the year came on the morning of the 10th of November. It came down slowly. It did not, in the way of the first snows that hurry to lay themselves on the world, hurry. It came in the wide, quiet sideways way of a snow that knew it had a long time to fall. It fell on the lake until the lake forgot it was a lake. It fell on the grounds until the grounds forgot they were grounds. It fell on the stone walls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry until the walls were the color of the air, and the air was the color of the walls, and the castle, by mid-morning, was a single quiet white thing in the middle of a quiet white country. The Gryffindor common room, on that morning, smelled of wood smoke and bacon and slightly burnt toast. The slightly burnt toast was Sirius Black's contribution to breakfast. Sirius Black, who had moved into the small staff flat at the foot of the tower 3 weeks before, with the limited but firm permission of Albus Dumbledore and the comprehensive, enthusiastic permission of Harry Potter, had taken to coming up the spiral stair on Saturday mornings, in slippers, with a tray. The tray was his own invention. Madame Pomfrey had provided the eggs. Sirius had provided the everything else, with mixed results. "The bacon is excellent," he said. He set the tray on the small round table by the fire. "I admit the bacon is mine. The toast is a separate matter. The toast is a small, ongoing experiment. The experiment is going to take, I think, several more Saturdays." "The toast is fine, Sirius," said Hermione from her armchair in the patient tone of a girl who had already, in the 3 weeks of these breakfasts, established that the toast was, in fact, never fine and that this would be a continuing comedy. "The toast is character building." "That is what I tell myself, Hermione. That is exactly the line of self-talk. You are wise beyond your years." "Thank you. It is not a compliment. It is a warning. Wisdom past one's years is going to bite you in the long run. Be wise within your years. Be deeply, ordinarily wise." "I will consider it, Sirius." "Consider it quickly, Hermione." Ron, on the rug in front of the fire with a chessboard, did not lift his head. "Toast is fine. Black always claimed Lupin couldn't toast either. Got the impression in 3rd year." "Ron," said Sirius, "how did you find out about never mind? Eat the toast. The toast loves you. The toast wants to be eaten." Harry sat on the low couch in the corner where, 3 weeks ago, the bird had begun, in the small, considered manner of a phoenix taking its time, to build a nest. The nest was on the mantelpiece. It was not, in the strict sense, on the mantelpiece, because the mantelpiece had a clock at one end and a small Gryffindor lion at the other, and the bird had not, in any of the days of his construction, asked either the clock or the lion to move. The nest was above the mantelpiece, on the small narrow ledge where the wall began to slope inward toward the chimney's flue. The ledge was perhaps 2 feet wide and a foot deep, and it had never, in 800 years of Hogwarts, been put to any use, although the small Gryffindor lion below it had, on various occasions, looked up at it speculatively. The bird had begun the nest on a Tuesday by bringing in, from somewhere, a single twig from a willow tree. He had set the willow twig on the ledge. He had looked at the willow twig for some time. He had then brought in some careful order of his own devising, a second twig, of a kind of oak none of the children in the room had been able to identify, a third twig of blackthorn, a fourth twig of laurel, and a small spray of dried lavender, which he had presented to Hermione first, in case she wished to keep it, and which Hermione had, after a long thinking moment, given back to him to take up to the nest. The nest had grown, over the 3 weeks, by small additions every day. There were now bits of red velvet in it that no one had been able to account for. There were strands of straw from the Hogwarts stable. There were a few long red feathers that the bird had shed, in a quiet, practical way, and added to his own construction. There was, in the very center of the nest where the bird sat when he was not on Harry's shoulder, a small round bear cup which the bird had lined, this morning, with a single curled brown thing that Hermione, at first puzzled, had eventually identified as the long-lost hair ribbon of the 7th-year Gryffindor girl Lavender Pratt, who would be told, in due course, the manner of its recovery. The bird, this morning, was not in the nest. He was on Harry's shoulder. He was sleeping the slow phoenix sleep against the side of Harry's neck. "Right," said Sirius, sitting down in the armchair beside Hermione's with a piece of toast in his hand which he was about to fail to eat. "Plans, the day, walk after breakfast, lake's pretty, snow's snowing. I will give you each one task to complete by the end of the walk." "Sirius," said Hermione. "Hermione, your task is to convince me that you are not, somehow, secretly 40. Ron, your task is to lose the next 3 rounds of chess to me deliberately, in such a way that I do not notice." He paused. "Harry." "Yes," said Harry. "Your task is to come and see the headmaster at 3. He has been asking very politely for some weeks now." "I know. He will not bite. I will come with you. He has consented to my coming with you. He has, in fact, asked that I come. He is preparing himself, I think, to apologize for several different things at once, and he would like, I believe, a witness." "All right. You are doing remarkably well, kid. I have a good toast supplier. You are a remarkable boy. Hermione, write that down. The boy's first joke. I have been waiting for a first joke." "It is in my notebook, Sirius," said Hermione, who had a different notebook now, a smaller one in which she had begun, with great care, to write down only things that pleased her, and which she kept in the inner pocket of her cardigan. The walk along the lake was the kind of walk one takes by accident through a country that one has, until that morning, considered familiar. The lake's edge was white. The lake itself was not frozen. Only the very fringe of it had begun to crisp into a lace of small, thin plates, and beyond the lace the water was black and slow and full. The bird flew, on the long shallow loops he had taken to flying when Harry walked, between the willows on the shore and the dark water of the lake. Hermione walked beside Harry. Ron walked beside Hermione. Sirius walked, hands in his coat pockets, beside Harry's other side. They did not, at first, speak. Sirius cleared his throat once. The throat clear became a small private laugh which Sirius did not explain. Hermione watched her boots leave prints in the snow, and counted, in the small, quiet way that she counted, in a corner of her mind. "Harry," said Sirius, after a long time, "I want to say something. I want to say it now, before we have the meeting at 3, because by 3 I will be in the kind of room I am not always good in, and I would prefer to have said it before that." "May I?" "Yes," said Harry. "I have been writing to a man called Andromeda Tonks. She is my cousin. I am going to be living with her in her house in London for the foreseeable. She has a daughter and a husband and a great deal of patience. She is a healer. She has examined me twice in the last fortnight and concluded that I am, in fact, alive, although she has revised her opinion of by how much. The point of telling you this is, I want you to know that I am going to be in a place, kid, for the next several years. I am going to be in the same place. I am not, in the immediate future, going to be a man who lives in attics. I am not going to be a man who is on the run. I am going to be a man with an address. I would like you to come to that address whenever you like, when you have holidays, when you have weekends, when you have a Thursday afternoon and a bored hour and a willingness to apparate sight along with a teacher. The address will be there. I will be there. Do you understand? Yes, said Harry. Good. I have been wanting to be the kind of person who has an address for some years. I am going to have one. That is the point. The point is the address. The address. Number 12, Grimmauld Place, London, if you must know. I have inherited it from my mother by virtue of being her last surviving heir, and I have, in the last several weeks, with my cousin's help, removed from it most of the worst of her opinions, which had been imprinted on the walls. It is not yet a comfortable house. It is, however, mine. I would like it to also be yours, in the sense that you have the run of it. You will, in any case, have a bedroom. I have already decided which one. I have already painted the door. The door is, you will see, the point is the door. I have been painting doors. I have been painting doors for 2 weeks. Andromeda has been encouraging me. Andromeda thinks doors are a healthy thing to be painting. Serious, said Harry very softly. That is, thank you. You are welcome, kid. You are very welcome. The bird flew low along the line of the shore and turned and came back and landed on the snowy bank beside Harry's foot and stood there looking at the lake with its head tipped to one side in the contented small patience of a creature on a familiar errand. Harry, said Hermione. Yes. I want to tell you something also. All right. She walked for a few more steps in silence. Her boots made the small, soft crunch of new snow under a child's foot. She lifted her face. Her cheeks were pink. The pink was the pink of the cold and a little of something else. I have decided, she said, that I am going to take a long time to study what has happened to you. I am going to take a longer time than I had originally planned. I have decided that the thing that is in you is not a thing that anyone in the ministry has the right to put a name on, and that the people who have ever tried to put a name on it have largely been wrong, and that the people who will, in the next several years, try to put a name on it will largely be wrong also, and that I would, as a working project, like to be the person who eventually gets it right. I have been thinking about this for some weeks. I have not yet told you because I did not want to tell you while it was still half a thought. I have, this morning, finished the rest of the thought. I would like to tell you. All right. I am going to read every book in the school library that has anything to do with the Phoenix line, beginning at the back of the library where the older books are. And I am going to read them in the original where I can. And I am going to write a book about what I find. And I am going to publish the book when I am older, because publishing a book when one is 12 is, I have read, considered gauche in academic circles. I would like, with your permission, to interview you on a regular basis for the book. I would like to keep a careful record of how the inheritance manifests in you over the next 10 years. I would like you to feel under no obligation to participate. I will not be hurt if you say number I am only telling you. It will be my project for the next 20 years. I would like you to know what it is. That is, Harry began. He stopped. He looked at her. Hermione, yes, of course. Yes, I would like to be interviewed. I would like you to write the book. I would like you to publish it when you are older. I would, if you do not mind, like to read the drafts. You are going to be, by the time the drafts are written, she said, more or less the only living expert on the subject. Of course I would like you to read the drafts. Then yes, she nodded once. It was a small, precise nod, of the kind she did when ticking a box. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Hermione. Ron, who had been walking beside Hermione, said in a small, embarrassed voice, Harry, can I say something too? I have a thing also. It is smaller. Yes, of course, said Harry. I am very glad you sat with me on the train, said Ron, looking at his boots. And I am very glad you bought half the sweets. And I am very glad you didn't laugh at me when I lost the night to Hermione last Tuesday. And I am very glad that I get to be your friend. I have been wanting to say that for a few days. I have been working up to it. I have been bad at working up to it. I am working up to it now. Harry stopped walking. He turned. He looked at Ron, whose face was very pink and whose eyes were on his boots. The bird on Harry's shoulder was awake. "Ron," said Harry, "I am very glad you sat in the empty compartment. I am very glad your mother put a corned beef sandwich in your bag. I am very glad you keep losing nights to Hermione. I am very glad I get to be your friend." He paused. I had been working up to saying that too. I had been bad at it. Ron looked at his boots a moment longer. Then Ron looked up. His face had a small, wide, unwilling grin on it which he did not, in his current attempt at dignity, want to be wearing. "All right," he said. "All right. Well, now we've done that then." "Now we've done it," said Harry. Sirius, who had stopped walking when they had stopped and who was looking at the lake with great concentration, said, in a small, careful voice that did not at all do what it was trying to do, "I am going to need you, all three of you, to walk on ahead for a moment. I am going to follow in about 30 seconds. I am going to be along." "Yes, go on." They went on. The bird on Harry's shoulder did one of its slow blinks. The snow fell. The headmaster's office was warm when they came up the spiral stair at 3. The fire in the great fireplace was lit. The kettle on the small hob beside the fire was warm. 2 chairs had been set out in front of the desk. Albus Dumbledore, who had been at the window when they came in, turned at the sound of the door, and his face, in the warm light, was the face of a man who had been preparing, with great care, for an hour he had been postponing for several weeks and had decided not to postpone any longer. "Harry," he said. "Sir." "Sirius." "Headmaster," said Sirius. "Permission to be a chaperone." "Granted," said Dumbledore. "Please sit." "Sirius, the 3rd chair I have arranged for you is by the door, because I have observed that you have, in your life, preferred to sit near a door. I have not assumed this to be a slight against me. Please, sit. Tea?" "Please," said Harry. Dumbledore made the tea. He made it himself with his own hands from a tin of leaves he kept on the small hob, in the slow, careful manner of a man who had been making tea for 90 years and who was making this particular tea with extra attention. He poured the tea. He brought the cups on saucers to Harry and Sirius. He returned to his own desk. He sat. He folded his hands. He looked at Harry. "Harry," he said, "I owe you an apology. I owe you several apologies. They are not, all of them, the kind of apology I can give you in a single sitting, because they involve a great many things, some of which you do not yet know, and some of which I will not today be the one to tell you. I would like, however, today to begin. Will you allow me to begin?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you, Harry. The first apology I would like to make is the easiest to articulate and the worst on its own terms. I made a decision, on the morning of the 1st of November, 1981, to place you, against the express objections of Professor McGonagall and the careful written wishes of your godfather, in the home of your aunt and uncle, in the conviction that you would be safer there than anywhere else available to me. I did not, before making the decision, check whether your aunt and uncle would treat you with the affection that you were entitled to. I knew them only by the small particular things I had heard about your aunt from your mother, who had loved her more than your aunt had ever, I think, loved her back. I made a decision about 10 years of your life on the basis of an old assumption that I had not checked. I have in the last several weeks made inquiries. I have learned, with the help of Sirius and of Madame Pomfrey, the manner in which you were treated. I am sorry, Harry, I am sorry. The cupboard was not an arrangement I had imagined. I should have imagined it. I did not. I am sorry for that. I am sorry that I did not check. I am sorry that I did not, until very recently, even begin to check." "All right, sir. The second apology," said Dumbledore, "is for the protections I placed on you when you were small, which were too few to keep you happy and too many to allow your magic to grow at its own pace. The third is for the supervision I did not arrange for you, against the day when an inheritance might, on the schedule of magical biology rather than the schedule of school terms, become urgent. The fourth is for the fact that, having decided to attend to your life from a distance, I did not attend closely enough to know that the man who was, in those years, walking around the school in a turban, was carrying inside him a small piece of an old enemy. I was, that year, distracted by an arrangement of my own. I had decided that the arrangement was more important. I was wrong." "All right, sir." "The fifth," said Dumbledore, is the one I have not yet, even now, decided whether I have the right to make. It is the apology for the fact that I had arranged for your life to end, Harry, at a certain particular moment which I had been preparing for many years to identify. I had decided that you would have to die at a moment of my choosing in order to allow a certain larger thing to happen which I judged necessary. The judgment was not a kind one. The judgment was a calculation. I have been, in my long life, calculating in the place where I should have been listening, more times than I would care to count. I will not today take the opportunity to defend the calculation. I will only say that it was the kind of decision that I had been comfortable making about other people's children for many decades, and that it was easy to me because I had been making decisions of its kind for a long time, and that the ease of it was the worst part of it. I am sorry, Harry. I am sorry I had decided about you. I am sorry that I had decided about you in a way that did not involve consulting you. I am sorry that there were, in fact, no decisions of that kind to be made about you in the first place, because you and your bird between you had made every one of them unnecessary by the morning of the 31st of July. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry. I have not perhaps told you the full of it. I would like to tell you the full of it in the coming year in such pieces as you can bear to hear. I am not asking you to forgive me today. I would prefer if you did not. I would prefer if you took your time. Harry sat for some seconds in the warm, small room with the cup of tea on his knee. The bird on his shoulder did the slow blink. The fire in his chest, which had been quiet through the whole apology, gave a small low sigh that was not, this time, sleep but a kind of slow attention. He looked at the headmaster. "Sir," he said, "you and I have a great many years left, I think." "I hope so, Harry. I do not need to decide anything today. I will think about what you have said. I will say back, in time, what I have to say back. I do not want to be a person who says nothing forever. I do not want to be a person who says everything at once either. May I take some time?" "Yes, Harry. Thank you. Thank you, Harry. Thank you for letting me say it. Thank you for the tea." "You made the tea, sir. You let me make it, Harry." The headmaster, in the chair behind his desk with his hands folded, looked at the boy and looked at the bird on the boy's shoulder, and his old face did, by a quiet rearrangement of itself, a small visible thing. The thing the face did was not a smile. It was a softening of all the small, careful lines of strategy that had lived in his face for 80 years, and that he had not, in 80 years, been able to put down. The lines, in the warm light of the office, looked smaller than they had looked the day Harry had first walked into the hall. Sirius, by the door in the chair Dumbledore had set for him, did not say anything for some time. He had been watching with the particular careful watching of a man who had earned, by absence, the right to make sure that the apology was being given in the manner it should be given. He had been watching the headmaster mostly. He had not been watching Harry. He had not needed to. He had been watching the headmaster. He stood, after a long moment. "Albus," he said. "Yes, Sirius. You have been thinking about that for several weeks." "Yes, Sirius. I am glad you said it out loud. I am also glad." "May I ask, Sirius, is the rest of what I have to say to him to be said today, do you think, or, not today," said Sirius. "He has done very well today. He has had a great deal said to him today. I think the rest can wait." "I agree. Then we should go." "Yes." "Headmaster," said Sirius, with the small wry tip at the corner of his mouth that he had inherited by some unaccountable coincidence from a woman who had not ever been related to him, "thank you for the tea." "You did not drink any tea, Sirius." "I did not. I am, however, thanking you for it. I am going to thank you for many things in the next several years that I have not done. The thanking is the new thing I am working on. The painting of doors was the previous thing. The thanking is next. It will go better, I think, than the painting did. I look forward to it, Sirius. As do I, Albus." They went down the spiral stair together. The stair, going down, made the slow, careful turning sound it had made for centuries. The bird flew in a long single loop around the top of the stairwell and came back and settled again on Harry's shoulder. In the corridor outside, Hermione and Ron were sitting on a long stone bench under a tapestry. They stood up when Harry came out. They did not, in the way of children who had not been in the meeting, ask questions. They walked back to the tower with him in a quiet, careful, close way which Harry, by the third corridor, registered as the deliberate small attention of two friends who had decided to be a kind of weather for him for the next hour. In the common room, the fire was high. The afternoon light through the windows was the dim mauve of a winter dusk arriving early. The bird left Harry's shoulder when they came in. He flew to the small ledge above the mantelpiece. He stood for a moment beside the nest. He turned, once, in the manner of a bird examining a thing he had just remembered he had been making. He stepped down into the nest. He folded himself. He had not, in the 3 weeks of building, slept in the nest. He had slept on Harry's headboard, or against Harry's neck, or, on certain quiet afternoons, on the back of an armchair near Hermione's. Today, in the dim mauve, he folded himself into the small round cup of the nest and tucked his head against his shoulder and closed his eyes. The common room, which had been at its ordinary low noisy hum, slowly went quiet around them in the small respectful way the common rooms of houses go quiet around things which they have understood, by means none of them have asked to be explained, are significant. Older Gryffindors looked up. The first years on the rug looked up. The cat in the corner looked up. The clock on the mantelpiece, which had been ticking, ticked. Harry walked with Hermione on one side of him and Ron on the other side to the long couch by the fire. He sat. He looked up at the nest. The bird was already asleep. "He's home," Hermione said very softly after a moment. "Yes," said Harry. Is that, what does that mean?" "I don't know," said Harry, also softly. "I think it means he has decided to be in this room for some time." All right. Ron, who had sat on Harry's other side, with his shoulder a respectful inch from Harry's shoulder, said, in a voice that was small and careful, Does that mean he won't be coming with you then to classes?" "I think he will come with me to classes," said Harry. "When I want him to, I think he will spend his nights here. I think he will spend, perhaps, his middle of his days here. I think the nest is where he sleeps. I think we have a nest in our common room now." "All right," said Ron after a moment. "All right." The fire in the grate cracked once. The cat in the corner closed its eyes. The clock ticked. The snow at the windows fell. On the chest beside Harry's bed in the dormitory upstairs, the painted Lily, in her small frame, opened her eyes briefly, looked at no one, and smiled the small wry tip at the corner of her mouth, and closed her eyes again. In a country house in Wiltshire, on a small black-stained wooden shelf, Narcissa Malfoy, who had been replacing a book on the third wall for the 7th time in 2 weeks, sat down at her writing desk with a sheet of paper and a quill, and began, in the careful hand she had been taught at 16, the first letter she had ever written, in her life, to a woman she had not seen in 19 years. The letter began, Andromeda. In a small flat in North London, the woman whose first name was Andromeda set the kettle on the hob and looked out at the snow falling beyond the kitchen window, and pretended to herself that the kettle was the thing she was paying attention to. In a small upper room at the King's Head in Hogsmeade, a thin man in a grey coat folded a blanket and set it on the foot of a bed and looked at the room for a long time and decided that, on the whole, he was glad to be vacating it. In a small village in the south of France, in a café on a street with 3 plane trees in flower out of season, a thin man with a turban-shaped pale patch on his forehead drank a cup of black coffee and looked at the plane trees and decided, very slowly, that he was perhaps going to be all right. In a stone room below the Hogwarts dungeons, with the lamp on his desk turned low, Severus Snape sat with a single sheet of paper in front of him on which he had written, in his careful copperplate, the name of a woman who had been dead for 10 years. He looked at the name a long time. He did not, in the looking, weep. He folded the paper once, twice, 3 times into a small square no larger than a coin, and he put the small square into the inner pocket of his coat, against the lining where the warmth of his body would find it. He stood. He extinguished the lamp. He walked the slow corridor that led to the hall, where the staff were beginning to gather for dinner. And on the way he passed a third-year Hufflepuff girl who had been crying quietly against the wall about some small girlish matter, and he stopped. And he did not say anything, and he did not console her. But he stood beside her, in the corridor, for the length of one breath, in the small, dry presence of a man who had once been a boy who had also cried quietly in corridors. And then he walked on. And the girl, after a moment, found that she had, in the standing, somehow stopped crying. In a tower at Hogwarts, an old man with white hair and half-moon spectacles sat at his desk and looked at the empty perch behind him and put his hand on the perch very lightly. The way a man pats a small animal that no longer lives in the place where he is patting, and sat back down again and took out a sheet of parchment. He wrote at the top of it, "Things I have understood," and a small, uncertain little smile lifted the corner of his mouth. And he began, in the patient hand of a man with several years still ahead of him, to make a list. In the Gryffindor common room, on the long couch by the fire, Harry Potter, with Hermione Granger asleep on his right shoulder and Ron Weasley asleep on the rug at his feet with a chess piece in his hand, looked up at the small phoenix nest on the ledge above the mantelpiece, and at the small folded bird in it, and at the long red feather that hung over the lip of the nest in a way that was almost intentional, and the fire under his ribs sat in him, slow and warm and steady, and he understood. In a quiet way that did not have any name to it, that he was at the correct temperature, and that he was in the room he was meant to be in, and that the room contained, this evening, the small inventory of all the things he had been entitled to have. He sat there a long time. He thought, somewhere far behind the warm small attention he was paying to the room, about the moth that had risen out of his scar in the cupboard on the eve of his 11th birthday, and about the small pile of dust that the room had quietly inventoried into a corner. He thought about a ring under a floor in Little Hangleton, a locket on a velvet cushion, a cup on a stone shelf, a snake in a wood. He thought about a man on a lectern who had, at the very end, for the smallest possible part of a minute, been a boy named Tom. He understood that he was not glad of any of it, and that he was not sorry for any of it either, and that the feeling that lay between those two old useful words had not, perhaps, yet been given a name by any of the writers who had tried, and that one day, possibly, Hermione might write about it in the back of her book. He thought, finally, that his mother had said the right number of friends was 3, and that the count, this afternoon, was correct. Outside, the snow went on falling. Inside, the fire went on burning. The bird in the nest went on sleeping, and dreamed, in the slow ancient way that phoenixes dream, of small kitchens and morning bread, and a young woman in a kitchen in Godric's Hollow who had once, on a Wednesday morning in the year 1980, written a letter to her son.